Tonight we enter a room filled with clay tablets that survived nearly 4,000 years beneath the dust of ancient Mesopotamia. In 1889, excavators working at Nippur began uncovering thousands of inscribed fragments from one of the most important sacred cities of the ancient world. Scholars connected with the University of Pennsylvania later helped preserve and study this enormous archive, while specialists at institutions such as Oxford and the British Museum continued reconstructing the language and beliefs hidden inside the clay. Some tablets contain accounts of kings, others record grain, land, debts, prayers, hymns, and divine names. Among those names appears a mysterious group of gods known in Sumerian tradition as the Anunna, later widely called the Anunnaki. Their presence is quieter than modern legends suggest, yet it is persistent. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and tell me where you are listening from, along with your local time, as we begin beneath the ancient night sky. You can almost feel the dry clay beneath your fingertips. The tablet is smaller than you expect, perhaps fitting comfortably inside both hands. Its surface is covered with wedge-shaped impressions pressed into wet clay by a reed stylus. Nothing about it resembles a modern book. There are no pages to turn, no elegant illustrations, and no helpful chapter headings waiting patiently for you. Instead, there are marks, rows of them. Each sign belongs to one of humanity's earliest writing traditions, developed in southern Mesopotamia during the late 4th millennium before the Common Era. The earliest surviving texts are mostly practical records, created to manage grain, livestock, labour, and property. Civilization, it seems, begins with accounting more often than poetry. There is something gently amusing about that. You might expect humanity's oldest writing to announce the secrets of existence. Instead, many tablets appear concerned with barley deliveries, sheep totals, and whether somebody received the correct amount of beer. Yet among those ordinary records, another world gradually emerges. Names of gods appear beside offerings. Temples appear beside fields. Priests, administrators, kings, and divine households occupy the same clay landscape. This is one of the most important facts about ancient Mesopotamian religion. The gods were not treated as distant philosophical ideas. They were understood as active powers connected with particular cities, temples, natural forces, offices, and cosmic responsibilities. For the people living there, sacred geography was everywhere. A river could belong to a divine order. A city could stand beneath the protection of a god. A temple could function as a household where servants prepared meals, textiles, music, incense, and ceremony for an unseen resident. The divine world did not exist somewhere entirely separate. It overlapped with human life. That becomes important when you encounter the group later called the Anunnaki. Modern audiences often hear that name and immediately imagine beings descending from another planet. Ancient texts are far less straightforward. They present something older, stranger, and much harder to compress into a single modern category. In Sumerian compositions, the related term Anunna refers to a collective of important gods. Their exact membership changes depending on the text, period, city, and religious tradition being described. They can appear as a divine assembly, as powerful judges, or as members of the greater community of gods. There is no single surviving tablet that provides a convenient biography of them. Ancient religion rarely behaves so politely. Instead, you gather fragments. One hymn gives them a role in divine authority. Another composition places groups of gods within a cosmic hierarchy. Later Mesopotamian traditions reshape their identities again, sometimes connecting them with the underworld or with divine judgment. This shifting character has created an open scholarly debate about how consistently ancient communities understood the group across different centuries. Specialists continue examining whether particular references describe a fixed category or a flexible divine collective shaped by local theology. That uncertainty matters. It means the mystery begins inside the ancient evidence itself. You are not looking at a neat mythology written by one author at one moment. You're looking at centuries of religious memory, copied and recopied by scribes living under changing kingdoms. Imagine one of those scribes. You sit on a low surface inside a temple school, your fingers already dusty with clay. Somewhere nearby, sandals scrape across packed earth. Reed baskets lean against a wall, the air smells of mud brick, oil smoke, and the faint sweetness of dates. Your teacher gives you a text to copy. You press one sign carefully, then another. The work is slow because every mistake matters. Clay is forgiving while wet, but once dried or fired, mistakes can survive longer than empires. That is the strange joke hidden inside archaeology. A nervous student copying an exercise thousands of years ago may accidentally become more permanent than the king ruling outside. Some surviving tablets are exactly that ordinary. They contain school exercises, vocabulary lists, copied hymns, multiplication tables, and repeated signs written by learners. That is our quirky detail. Not every ancient tablet was created by a priest guarding forbidden knowledge. Some were ancient homework. And yet homework preserves worlds. A student repeatedly copying divine names can preserve the shape of a religious system long after the temple itself has collapsed into dust. You begin to see why the Anunna are difficult to dismiss as a small mythological curiosity. Their significance does not depend on one dramatic story. Their importance comes from appearing inside a much larger sacred structure. They belong to a universe where divine authority is organized. There are senior gods. There are councils. There are decrees. There are destinies. There are places assigned to divine powers and duties distributed across the cosmic order. This is where the atmosphere quietly changes. You came expecting a story about mysterious beings. Instead, the tablets present something closer to an ancient administration of reality. The people who wrote these texts did not describe chaos ruled by random spirits. They imagined an ordered cosmos in which divine powers possessed responsibilities, territories, relationships, and ranks. That idea appears repeatedly across Mesopotamian literature. The gods gather, they deliberate, they establish decisions, they determine fates. Human kingship, agriculture, cities, storms, rivers, fertility, justice, warfare, wisdom, and death all sit somewhere inside this vast sacred architecture. The Anunna belong within that architecture, and this creates the first unsettling question. If these gods were understood as part of the permanent structure of the world, what would it actually mean for them to leave? The question sounds modern, yet the tension comes from something ancient. Mesopotamian texts rarely describe the divine world as a group of visitors briefly appearing on Earth and then departing forever. Gods move between temples, cities, heavens, mountains, rivers, and underworld realms, but their presence remains woven into cosmic order. A sea can lose divine favour. A temple can be abandoned. A kingdom can fall. But divine authority continues. Records from destroyed cities sometimes describe catastrophe as the withdrawal of a city's protecting deity. The image is powerful because absence itself becomes meaningful. If the god leaves the city becomes vulnerable. Yet even there, the deity has not vanished from existence. The relationship has changed. You stand in imagination among the ruins of Nippur beneath a cooling evening sky. Mud brick walls rise only slightly above the ground. Wind crosses the open plain. Somewhere beneath your feet, thousands of tablets once waited in silence. Many carried no prophecy. Many revealed no cosmic secret. Still, together they preserve a civilization that understood humanity as living inside a world saturated with divine presence. Perhaps that is where the deeper mystery begins. Not with a spacecraft or not with a hidden arrival, but with an ancient idea that the powers shaping human existence were already here, embedded in cities, laws, rivers, temples, and the invisible structure of the world itself. You turn one imagined tablet beneath the dim light. The signs remain silent, yet they refuse to feel empty. Your mind drifts southward across a landscape that no longer looks the way ancient people knew it. The air is warm and heavy. Reeds crowd the edges of slow waterways, while muddy channels divide a plain stretching toward a distant horizon. There are no stone mountains nearby, no forests filled with timber, and very little natural rock suitable for monumental building. Yet cities rise here. They rise from mud. Southern Mesopotamia seems an unlikely place for some of the humanity's earliest great urban communities. The land depends upon rivers whose courses can shift, flood, retreat, and leave entire settlements facing either abundance or disaster. You walk beside an irrigation canal as evening settles across the plain. Water moves quietly between earthen banks. The scent of wet clay mixes with reeds, animals, smoke, and cultivated fields. Somewhere beyond the canal, people are harvesting grain beneath a sky almost empty of clouds. Canals must be dug. Banks must be repaired. Fields must receive water at the correct time. If too little arrives, crops fail. If too much arrives, fields disappear beneath floodwater. Researchers at the University of Chicago have long studied how irrigation, agriculture, administration, and settlement interacted throughout ancient Mesopotamia. Archaeological surveys reveal that communities became increasingly concentrated around systems of cultivated land and controlled water. That transformation helped produce cities unlike anything most earlier human communities had experienced. Uruk became one of the largest during the 4th millennium before the Common Era. As population expanded dramatically, monumental buildings appeared, administrative systems became more complicated, and writing gradually developed alongside economic management. You can imagine approaching its walls across open farmland. The city does not appear suddenly. First come fields, then canals, then workshops, then clusters of houses. Finally, massive buildings rise above the surrounding roofs. Some are decorated with patterned clay cones pressed into walls to create coloured geometric surfaces. Others stand on raised platforms that separate sacred space from everyday streets. There is noise everywhere. Donkeys complain. Potters work. Children out. Reed boats slide through nearby channels. People carry baskets of grain towards storehouses while administrators attempt the timeless miracle of keeping accurate records. Civilization has arrived, and it already requires paperwork. The humour is gentle, but the reality is serious. A city containing thousands of people needs rules, storage, labour organisation, religious authority, and ways of distributing resources. None of these systems emerges fully formed. They develop slowly. That slow development matters because later Mesopotamian stories often describe civilization very differently. In sacred tradition, cities can appear as gifts connected with divine order. Kingship can descend from heaven. Temples can stand at the centre of relationships between gods and communities. Archaeology reveals centuries of gradual human construction. Myth remembers something more sudden. You stand between those two ways of seeing the past. One is built from pottery layers, carbon dates, building foundations, environmental evidence, and excavated streets. The other survives through stories copied by scribes who believed the distant past contained events too important to forget. neither speaks in quite the same language. Or consider Eridos. Ancient tradition treated it as one of the earliest cities, and archaeological excavations uncovered a long sequence of sacred buildings constructed repeatedly on roughly the same location. One structure replaces another. Then another rises above it. Generation after generation returns to the same sacred ground. Researchers associated with Oxford and other major institutions have examined how early Mesopotamian temples developed from relatively modest buildings into increasingly elaborate religious centres. The pattern suggests continuity rather than a single miraculous beginning. Yet Mesopotamian memory gives Eridu an extraordinary position. In later traditions, it stands near the beginning of organised civilization itself. This creates a fascinating tension. Archaeology sees layers. Sacred memory sees origins. Perhaps both perspectives are responding to the same human experience. Imagine living in a settlement where your temple has stood for longer than anyone remembers. Your parents worshipped there. Their parents worshipped there. Beneath the floor lie earlier walls built by people whose names are forgotten. Eventually age becomes mystery. Mystery becomes sacredness. And sacredness becomes a story about beginnings. There is an unusual detail buried within the archaeology of these early communities. Some ancient buildings were deliberately filled, levelled, or covered before newer structures were built above them. The old sacred place was not always simply demolished and forgotten. It could remain physically present beneath the new one. The dead architecture stayed underneath. You might call that an ancient form of memory stored in mud brick. Nobody walking across the later floor needed to see those earlier walls. Their presence still mattered because the sacred location continued. This habit can feel almost symbolic. Civilization literally stands upon the forgotten generations. Outside the cities, another force shapes memory. Flood water. The Tigris and Euphrates river systems are capable of violent and unpredictable changes. Ancient settlements sometimes experienced destructive floods, while river channels migrated across the plain over centuries. Excavators at several Mesopotamian sites discovered flood deposits separating periods of occupation. These deposits are real. They do not prove that one single flood covered the entire world. Instead, they show that severe local floods formed part of life in the region. That distinction has remained important in scholarly debate. Historians, archaeologists, and geological researchers continue discussing how specific flood traditions may relate to environmental events experienced by ancient communities. No single archaeological layer can simply be identified as the event described in every later story. Still, imagine what one catastrophic flood would mean to a family living beside these rivers. Your fields vanish. Walls collapse. Stored grain dissolves into mud. Animals scatter. A familiar landscape becomes open water. If you survive, you remember. If your children survive, they hear the story. If their grandchildren preserve it, the story begins changing. Names disappear. Distances expand. One terrible season becomes the flood that destroyed everything. Memory does not remain small forever. Centuries later, scribes record tales of ancient kings who lived before enormous disasters. Their reigns stretch across impossible lengths of time. Their world feels half historical and half dreamlike. Modern readers sometimes treat these enormous numbers as evidence of hidden technologies, unusual lifespans, or forgotten species. That interpretation remains fringe. A more cautious explanation considers symbolic numbers, scribal traditions, mathematical systems, and the sacred importance assigned to remote antiquity. Yet the strangeness remains. Why did Mesopotamian writers imagine the earliest ages so different from their own? Perhaps extreme numbers created distance. A king who rules for an ordinary lifetime belongs to history. A king who rules for thousands of years belongs somewhere else. He stands beyond normal memory. That may be exactly the point. The farther you travel into Mesopotamian tradition, the less stable time becomes. Archaeological chronology grows thinner while sacred stories become larger. Cities appear beneath divine protection. Floods divide ages. Kings belong to impossible generations. Civilization seems to emerge from a past that nobody can fully recover. You can feel the uncertainty in the landscape itself. A river changes course and abandons a settlement. Wind covers walls with dust. New houses rise above old foundations. A temple is rebuilt. Built. A name survives. Another disappears. Eventually, people living above those buried layers look backward and ask the same question humans still ask. Who came first? The answer becomes harder with every generation. Perhaps that is why ancient Mesopotamia developed such powerful stories about origins. The inhabitants lived surrounded by visible evidence that other people had already been there. Ruined walls could emerge beneath construction. Broken pottery covered the ground. Ancient foundations lay beneath newer temples. Their world was already old. Standing beneath the fading sky, you sense how easily history becomes sacred memory when enough time passes. The fields darken. Water continues through the canal. Somewhere under your feet are settlements without names, families without records, and generations whose lives vanished before writing could preserve them. Human history begins long before history can speak. And in that silence, the oldest stories begin to grow. The name itself seems to arrive through darkness. Anunnaki. You hear it today in documentaries, speculative books, internet discussions, and conversations about forgotten civilizations. The word has gathered an atmosphere almost independent of the tablets that preserved it. Yet the ancient meaning is quietus. You enter a temple courtyard where priests move between storerooms, offering tables and sacred chambers. Incense settles into the warm air, mingling with the smell of bread, oil, wool, and freshly poured beer. No one here speaks about visitors from another planet. They speak about gods. The people of ancient Mesopotamia imagined many divine beings with different ranks, responsibilities, families, and spheres of influence. Some were associated with particular cities, while others represented storms, wisdom, fertility, justice, warfare, or celestial bodies. The Anunnaki belonged within that immense divine community. Their identity was never perfectly fixed. That is the first difficulty. In the oldest Sumerian literary traditions, a related name often translated as the Anunna describes an important group of gods. Later Akkadian texts use the form now commonly rendered in English as Anunnaki. The number of gods involved changes. Their duties change. Their location can change as well. Ancient religion rarely provides the neat organizational chart a modern reader might secretly wish to find. One composition may present them as important members of a divine assembly, another may connect them with judgment, still another may associate some of them with the realm of the dead. This variation is not necessarily a contradiction. Religious traditions develop across centuries. Cities influence one another. Priests reinterpret older stories. Political power shifts, and divine hierarchies sometimes shift with it. Scholars at institutions including Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have long approached Mesopotamian religion through this changing historical landscape. Their work generally treats the Anunnaki as divine beings within Mesopotamian mythology, not as descriptions of extraterrestrial travellers. That distinction is important. It does not make the ancient material less mysterious. If anything, it makes the mystery more subtle. You picture a gathering of gods imagined by people living beneath a brilliant night sky. These divine figures are not simply characters entertaining listeners around a fire. They represent authority. They represent structure. They represent forces believed to shape existence. Some stand above humanity in rank. Some determine destinies. Some oversee regions of the cosmos that ordinary people cannot enter. The word Anunnaki therefore carries something closer to collective divine status than a modern biological identity. You are not reading the name of a species. You're reading the name of a sacred category. Even that statement needs caution. Specialists still debate how broadly the term should be understood across different periods and texts. Some references may describe a relatively select group, while others appear to use the name more widely. The surviving evidence refuses to settle comfortably. This is one reason modern interpretations can grow so easily around it. An uncertain category creates space, and human imagination dislikes empty spacing. A damaged tablet makes that problem even stronger. Imagine holding a clay fragment whose missing half contains precisely the lines you most want to read. The surviving sentence ends with a divine name, while the next words disappeared thousands of years ago. You know, something was there. You simply cannot know exactly what. Archaeologists experience this frustration constantly. Ancient texts often survive as broken pieces rather than complete works. Scholars join fragments, compare copies, reconstruct missing signs, and sometimes revise translations when better evidence appears. There is a charmingly strange detail in this process. Fragments of the same ancient composition can sit in museums thousands of miles apart for decades before anyone realizes they belong together. A tablet broken in antiquity can become an international puzzle. One half might rest in London. Another might remain in Philadelphia. A third could appear in a collection with uncertain excavation records. Eventually, specialists compare handwriting, clay shape, wording, and preserved lines. Pieces separated by centuries of accident suddenly begin speaking to one another again. It feels almost Oedipal or theatrical. The gods regain a sentence. Still, the restored sentence rarely says what modern legends claim. Popular alternative theories often describe the Anunnaki as advanced beings who arrived from another world. Some versions claim they created humanity through genetic manipulation, came to Earth seeking valuable minerals, or governed an ancient technological colony. These ideas became especially influential during the 20th century. They are not the standard interpretation among specialists in ancient Mesopotamian languages. That difference should remain clear. The surviving texts certainly describe gods interacting with humanity. They describe divine decisions, creation stories, sacred cities, extraordinary beings, cosmic regions, and relationships between heaven and earth. But those elements belong to a religious worldview. Calling them spacecraft, laboratories, or genetic engineers adds concepts the texts themselves do not clearly contain. Still, you can understand the temptation. Imagine encountering these stories without knowing the conventions of ancient religion. Gods descend. Gods issue commands. Gods possess knowledge beyond human understanding. Human beings receive civilization through divine instruction. Powerful figures move between cosmic realms. Read through a modern technological lens, the language can begin to look strangely familiar. The danger lies in translating metaphor into machinery. A divine vehicle becomes a spacecraft. Sacred radiance becomes electrical technology. Creation becomes genetic engineering. Heaven becomes another planet. Each step may feel small. Together, they create an entirely different zone. There is nothing wrong with exploring speculative possibilities as long as speculation remains visibly separate from translation. The clay deserves that honesty. You stand within an imagined archive where tablets rest on shelves, baskets and wooden supports. A lamp burns nearby, leaving smoke along the ceiling. A trained scribe would recognize divine names instantly. He would understand relationships that modern readers struggle to reconstruct. He might be confused by your questions. Were the Anunnaki aliens? Did they come from another planet? What kind of machines did they use? Perhaps he would stare at you with the exhausted expression of someone being asked whether thunder owns a passport. The comparison carries a little humour, yet the problem is real. Modern categories can distort ancient ideas. The Mesopotamians did not divide religion, astronomy, kingship, nature, and politics exactly as modern societies often do. Their gods existed within a web connecting all those things. A deity could represent natural power and political legitimacy simultaneously. A temple could be a religious centre and an economic institution. A myth could explain cosmic order while also reinforcing social authority. The Anunnaki belong inside that complicated world. You begin to see them less as mysterious individuals and more as members of a divine system. Their importance comes from position. They stand within assemblies. They participate in decisions. They carry authority that exceeds ordinary human power. Their names appear because the universe itself was imagined as governed. This may be less spectacular than tales of star travellers. It's also more unsettling in another way. A visitor can leave. A spaceship can depart. A traveller can return home. But a divine order woven into nature, kingship, death, and destiny does not require departure at all. That possibility remains only an interpretation of religious thought, not proof of physical beings living secretly among humanity. Yet the distinction changes the question completely. Perhaps asking where the Anunnaki went already assumes something the ancient texts never required. The people who wrote those names may not have imagined them as temporary guests. They may have imagined them as powers belonging to the architecture of existence itself. And beneath the silent clay, that idea remains remarkably difficult to erase. A low murmur fills the imagined hall. You cannot see everyone clearly, shadows gather between columns, and lamplight touches only fragments of faces, carved furniture, polished bowls, and the pale edges of ceremonial robes. The atmosphere is not chaotic. It feels procedural. Ancient Mesopotamian stories often present the gods gathering as a council, discussing matters that affect cities, kings, disasters, and the structure of human life. Divine authority is not always concentrated in one isolated figure. Decisions can emerge through assembly. That idea appears repeatedly across Mesopotamian religious literature. The gods meet. They listen. They argue. They decide. For the people preserving these traditions, the universe could resemble a court whose judgments reached far beyond any earthly palace. One important concept was destiny. Modern English makes that word sound poetic, perhaps even romantic. In Mesopotamian thought, destiny could be something far more concrete. A city could possess an appointed fate. A king could receive a fate. A temple, a people, or even the course of an event could fall beneath divine determination. The gods were therefore not merely watching existence. They were imagined as assigning its direction. Records studied by scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago show how deeply these ideas entered royal inscriptions, hymns, prayers, and literary compositions. Kings repeatedly claimed divine approval because political authority needed more than military success. It needed cosmic legitimacy. A ruler might control soldiers and storehouses, yet his kingship still required recognition from powers above human society. You can understand why. An ancient city is fragile. Disease can spread. A canal can fail. Enemies can approach. Harvests can collapse. A ruler who promises absolute control would soon encounter reality. Divine order provides another explanation. Success becomes approval. Defeat becomes judgment. Prosperity becomes vegi. Disaster becomes the consequence of a decision made somewhere beyond ordinary sight. This does not mean every Mesopotamian person interpreted every misfortune in exactly the same way. Ancient societies contain doubt, disagreements, and anxiety, and changing traditions just as modern societies do. Still, official texts repeatedly connect earthly events with divine intention. The Anunnaki appear within this wider system of authority. In some compositions, they are associated with the Great Divine Assembly. In others, their role becomes connected with judgment, especially in traditions describing the underworld. The precise arrangement changes across periods, yet the recurring image remains powerful. A group of gods participates in deciding what must happen. You imagine standing outside the chamber where such a decision is being made. Nobody invites you inside. That seems appropriate. The doors remain closed. Beyond them, voices determine matters you will experience without ever hearing the discussion. There is something unsettling about a universe imagined this way. Human beings act, struggle, build, marry, trade, travel, and pray. Yet behind their choices exists another layer of decision-making that they cannot fully access. Perhaps this reflects the experience of ordinary people living under ancient governments. Royal courts were then. Officials issued demands. Taxes arrived. Labour was required. Wars began because powerful men made decisions inside rooms most people would never enter. The Divine Council may have felt strangely familiar. Heaven could resemble administration on a magnificent scale. Even the gods sometimes appear to possess ranks and responsibilities. Some hold greater authority. Some carry messiah. Some control particular forces. Some preside over regions or institutions. The cosmos becomes organized rather than random. A curious feature of Mesopotamian religion reinforces this impression. Certain divine powers could be represented through objects, symbols, or concepts associated with legitimate order. Later interpreters sometimes imagine these as hidden technologies or physical devices containing supernatural knowledge. That is a reading. Mainstream scholarship usually understands such descriptions within religious, literary, and political contexts. Still, the imagery is fascinating. Divine authority can feel almost transferable. A city may possess sacred privileges. A ruler can receive symbols of office. A deity can grant or withdraw legitimacy. Power moves through an invisible system. It is not simply strength. It is authorization. That distinction matters. A king who wins a battle proves he is powerful. A king who claims the god selected him declares something much larger. He claims reality itself approves his position. Mesopotamian rulers understood the value of this language very well. Royal inscriptions often describe kings building temples, restoring cults, defeating enemies, and governing through divine favour. Their achievements are presented not merely as personal victories but as actions fitting an established cosmic order. Naturally, kings are rarely modest in their own inscriptions. A royal monument is not the ideal place to search for self-criticism. Yet exaggeration can still reveal what society considered persuasive. If divine approval appears constantly, then divine approval clearly mattered. You hear sandals moving across stone. A messenger approaches the imagined hall. Perhaps he carries news from a city. Perhaps a king has prayed for victory. Perhaps priests have performed rituals seeking an answer. The council remains hidden, but the outcome eventually enters the human world. This relationship raises a difficult scholarly question. When ancient texts describe the assembly of gods, Should modern readers understand these scenes primarily as theology, political metaphor, inherited myth, ritual imagination, or some combination of all four? Researchers continue debating how these categories overlap. The problem is that modern boundaries may not fit ancient thought. Religion and government were not separate worlds. Astronomy and divination could interact. Temple institutions controlled economic resources. Kingship carried sacred obligations. A mythological council might therefore express several kinds of truth simultaneously. It could describe the gods. It could mirror royal government. It could explain uncertainty. It could also teach audiences that authority depends upon order rather than individual impulse. You begin to notice how sophisticated the structure becomes. The divine world is not simply populated, it is governed. That governance has procedures, ranks, decisions, consequences, and forms of legitimacy. The Anunnaki participate within that environment as beings connected with authority greater than ordinary human judgment. This is not evidence for a hidden government physically operating beneath modern cities. Such claims move beyond what the texts support. The ancient idea is already strange enough. Imagine believing that every visible kingdom rests beneath another invisible kingdom. Human courts judge disputes. Divine courts judge kings. Human rulers establish laws. Divine assemblies establish destinies. A person can appeal to a governor. A king appeals to the gods. The hierarchy rises until human control disappears. There, uncertainty begins. Ancient prayers often reveal this vulnerability. People ask why suffering has come. They seek forgiveness for offences they may not even understand. They beg gods to restore health, protection, or favour. The emotional tone can feel surprisingly familiar. You obey as carefully as possible, yet something still goes wrong. Perhaps you offended a god unknowingly. Perhaps a ritual was neglected. Perhaps your city inherited consequences from a ruler's mistake. The universe seems ordered, but its rules remain partly hidden. That is an uncomfortable combination. Pure chaos can be frightening. Hidden order can be worse. At least chaos makes no claim to understand you. A divine council does. You remain near the imagined doorway as the lamps burn lower. The meeting ends without explanation. No proclamation is carved immediately onto the wall. No human observer receives a complete transcript. Only consequences appear. A king rises. Another falls. A city prospers. Another loses its protection. A river brings abundance. A storm destroys fields. The ancient mind sees these events and searches for the decision behind them. Somewhere beyond ordinary perception, authority has spoken. The council disperses. The world continues. And humanity lives beneath a judgment it can sense, interpret, fear, and worship, but never completely overhear. Coolness gathers beneath the heat of the plain. You stand near the ancient city of Eridu, where reed marshes once spread across a southern landscape shaped by water, mud, salt, and shifting channels. The horizon is flat enough to make the sky feel enormous. A faint breeze moves through the reeds. Water glimmers between them. To the ancient imagination, this was not merely a wet landscape surrounding a settlement. It touched one of the deepest ideas in Mesopotamian religion, a hidden freshwater realm beneath the surface of the inhabited world. That realm belonged especially to Enki. Enki was one of the major gods of Sumerian tradition. He was associated with wisdom, fresh water, craftsmanship, purification, fertility, cunning, and the ordering powers that make civilized life possible. His principal cult center was Eridu. Archaeology confirms that Eridu was occupied very early in southern Mesopotamian history, with sacred structures rebuilt repeatedly across many generations. Researchers from the University of Chicago, the University of Pennsylvania, and other major institutions have studied how such early temple centers developed alongside settlement, irrigation, and social organization. Eridu became more than an old city. It became an old memory. Within Mesopotamian religious tradition, Enki's dwelling was connected with a mysterious watery domain beneath the earth. This deep freshwater region was imagined as a source of life, purification, wisdom, and creative potential. You lower your hand toward the water. The surface seems simple. Beneath it, ancient thought places another world. This is important because modern stories often imagine powerful ancient beings arriving from the distant sky, yet Enki's sacred geography points in another direction entirely. Downward. Not toward a distant planet, not toward an invisible star, toward the depths beneath inhabited land. The people of southern Mesopotamia lived in a world where groundwater was not an abstract scientific concept. Wells, springs, canals, marshes, and river systems could determine where the community survived. Fresh water meant life. Salt water could ruin fields. Too little water brought hunger. Too much could destroy homes. It makes sense that sacred thought would place extraordinary significance beneath the surface. The hidden water below became a cosmic foundation. Enki belonged there. Mesopotamian texts sometimes describe his dwelling in language filled with abundance, flowing water, reeds, fertility, and mysterious knowledge. His realm is not simply dark or frightening. It is generative. Life rises from it. Order rises from it. Wisdom rises from it. You can almost hear water moving beneath the temple floor. Of course, no archaeological excavation has uncovered a literal divine palace beneath Eridu. The sacred descriptions belong to mythology and religious cosmology. Still, the location matters. The divine world was not imagined only above humanity. It also existed below. Well, this makes ancient Mesopotamian space surprisingly layered. The heavens stretch overhead. The human world occupies the middle. Freshwater depths lie beneath. The land of the dead occupies another hidden region. Sacred mountains, temples, rivers, and cities connect these levels through ritual and story. You do not live in a flat universe. You live between realms. Enki's position within this structure is especially intriguing because he often behaves differently from more distant or severe divine figures. He advises. He devises solutions. He protects. He sometimes works around decisions made by other gods. His intelligence is practical rather than decorative. When a crisis develops, Enki often understands the loophole. There is something almost mischievous about him. Ancient religion, thankfully, does not require wisdom to look permanently serious. One quirky tradition describes Enki as a god whose creative power can appear through bodily abundance, flowing waters, and acts that modern readers might find surprisingly earthy. Mesopotamian mythology often treats fertility without the delicate embarrassment modern audiences sometimes bring to the subject. Creation is physical. Water flows, plants grow, bodies reproduce. The sacred world is not sterile. This earthy quality helps explain why Enki feels so deeply connected to the landscape of southern Mesopotamia. He is not merely a distant celestial ruler. His power moves through water, craft, intelligence, and fertility. It enters ordinary survival. A potter needs skill. A canal builder needs knowledge. A priest needs purification. A ruler needs wise counsel. A farmer needs water. All these activities can exist inside Enki's sphere. Some modern and fringe interpretations transform his watery domain into something technological. They imagine subterranean bases, hidden installations or artificial structures concealed beneath ancient settlements. The texts do not provide evidence for such constructions. There are no clear descriptions of underground machines, sealed laboratories, or advanced habitats matching those claims. The speculation survives because the imagery is suggestive. A powerful being lives below. His realm contains knowledge. Water hides the entrance. Human beings interact with him through sacred institutions above. To a modern imagination trained by science fiction, the transformation is almost effortless. But ancient symbolism has its own logic. Scholars continue debating how literally different Mesopotamian communities imagined cosmic geography. Did ordinary worshippers picture a physical freshwater ocean beneath their feet, or did such descriptions primarily function through ritual, poetry, theology, and inherited tradition? The evidence does not preserve one universal answer. Belief rarely does. A priest composing a hymn may imagine sacred geography differently from a farmer repairing a canal bank. A royal scribe may emphasize one aspect, while a household worshipper may care about another. Religion exists differently inside different lives. You step toward the imagined temple of Enki. The structure rises above the surrounding settlement, built from mud brick and renewed through generations of human labor. Somewhere inside, offerings are prepared. Bread is carried inward. Beer is poured. Incense burn. Water is used in purification. The god's presence is treated as local. His temple is a house. His city is a center. His influence extends far beyond both. That combination is difficult to translate into modern categories. A god can possess a dwelling without being physically limited to it. A sacred image can embody presence without being identical to the entire deity. A river can express divine power without becoming the god himself. Ancient Mesopotamian religion lives comfortably inside these overlapping possibilities. Modern questions tend to demand sharper answers. Where exactly was Enki? Was he underground? Was he in the temple? Was he somewhere beyond the visible world? The ancient material does not always choose. Perhaps it never needed to. Sacred presence could be distributed. A deity could belong to several dimensions of meaning at once. That changes the mystery. If Enki's identity is tied to the life-giving depths beneath the world, then asking whether he departed from Earth becomes strangely difficult. How does a god of subterranean fresh water leave a realm imagined as part of Earth's own structure? The question may be badly formed. A river does not depart when people stop worshipping it. Groundwater does not vanish because a temple falls. The divine interpretation may disappear, while the physical world continues beneath it. Perhaps this is one reason ancient gods can feel oddly persistent. Their temples collapse. Their priesthoods vanish. Their languages fall silent. Yet the natural realities associated with them remain. Water still moves below the soil. Reeds still bend in marsh winds. Fresh springs still rise from hidden places. Wisdom remains invisible until someone gives it form. You listen to the faint sound of water. For a moment, Eridu seems less like a ruined city and more like a threshold. Above you stretches a bright and empty ski. Below you lies darkness filled with water. The ancient imagination chooses the hidden depths as a dwelling place for one of its wisest gods. That choice feels almost intimate. The divine presence is not impossibly far away. It is underneath everything. You cannot see it. You cannot reach it easily. But every cup of fresh water hints at the unseen reservoir below. The temple walls may crumble into dust. The city may retreat beneath sediment. Yet the ancient idea remains suspended in the landscape. Something powerful does not need to descend from the heavens if it was imagined beneath your feet all along. A scent of wet soil and crushed herbs drifts through the morning air. You stand beside a broad canal while workers guide water towards cultivated fields. Beyond them, boats move solely between settlements, carrying grain, reeds, pottery, timber, and wool. Nothing here happens by accident. Channels must be open. Fields must be measured. Livestock must be counted. Boats require builders. Temples require singers, cooks, brewers, cleaners, scribes, and administrators. Civilization is beginning to resemble an enormous arrangement of responsibilities. Mesopotamian literature sometimes describes this order through the actions of Enki, whose wisdom is expressed not merely through secret knowledge, but through organization. In one famous Sumerian composition, Enki travels through the world assigning functions to cities, lands, rivers, and divine powers. The story is remarkable for its scale. It does not describe creation as one sudden burst. Instead, the world becomes usable through distribution. Water receives direction. Cities receive importance. Crafts receive guardians. Agricultural abundance receives divine supervision. The landscape is divided into meaningful responsibilities. You can imagine Enki moving through this sacred geography like an administrator inspecting an immense estate. He encounters a place, he defines its role, he continues onward. There is almost something bureaucratic about the divine imagination. Even the cosmos appears to need careful management. That may sound amusing, but it reflects something deeply familiar to the people who preserve these stories. Ancient Mesopotamian society depended upon organized labor. A large irrigation network could not survive through individual effort alone. Canals accumulated. Banks broke. Water had to be allocated. Disputes arose when one field received more than another. Officials therefore measured land, recorded obligations, and organized workers. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania and the University of Chicago have shown through administrative records how intensely Mesopotamian institutions monitored grain, livestock, labor, and land. Clay tablets record astonishing levels of detail. Workers could receive measured rations. Animals could be listed individually. Fields could be assessed according to the expected production. Even quantities of beer could become administrative concerns. The gods of such a society naturally inhabit an ordered universe. A chaotic divine world would have felt strangely inefficient. In the composition describing Enki's ordering activity, natural regions and human occupations exist within a sacred network. The river does not merely flow. It serves a function. The plough does not merely cut soil. Agriculture belongs within a divinely established system. Craftsmanship becomes more than practical skill. It has a place in cosmic order. This is one of the most important differences between modern and ancient ways of imagining civilization. Modern people often speak about technology as something humanity invents independently. Mesopotamian traditions frequently describe essential arts as gifts, powers, or arrangements connected with the gods. Writing can possess a creed importance. Kingship can have divine origins. Music can belong within temple service. Agriculture can exist beneath supernatural protection. The useful and the sacred overlap constantly. You hear the rhythmic strike of wooden tools against earth. A group of labourers widens a canal. Their work looks ordinary. Mud sticks to their legs. The sun becomes uncomfortable. Someone complains. Someone else probably complains more creatively. Yet in the religious imagination surrounding them, irrigation belongs to a much larger order. Water itself connects human survival to divine authority. That connection becomes especially important because southern Mesopotamia cannot rely comfortably upon rainfall alone. Its agricultural system depends heavily upon controlled river water. Without irrigation, urban growth becomes difficult. Without organized layers, irrigation becomes unstable. Without administration, distribution becomes contentious. The civilization therefore grows through coordination. The myths give that coordination a sacred reflection. One quirky detail appears in administrative archives involving professional titles that seem surprisingly specialized. There were officials connected with livestock, textile production, brewing, storage, gardens, boats, and many other tasks. Some occupations were recorded with a precision that makes ancient cities feel unexpectedly modern. You can almost imagine a tired clerk discovering that civilization has invented another department. Such records reveal a world of specialization. Not everyone farms. Not everyone builds. Some people weave. Some brew. Some transport goods. Some perform rituals. Some calculate. Some write. A city becomes possible when thousands of people perform different tasks while depending upon one another. The sacred stories mirror this arrangement through divine specialization. One god does not control everything. Different powers oversee different domains. Responsibility is distributed. This does not mean Mesopotamian theology operated like a modern government office. The comparison is useful only because both systems reflect hierarchy, specialization, and authority. The ancient imagination remains religious, yet the pattern is difficult to miss. Civilization is portrayed as structured. That structure includes human beings. People do not simply receive benefits from divine organization, they are expected to work within it. Farmers cultivate. Builders construct. Priests maintain temples. Kings administer justice. Soldiers defend cities. Craftworkers produce objects. Scribes preserve accounts and traditions. Each role contributes to a larger system whose ultimate legitimacy can be traced upward toward divine order. This raises an open, scholarly question. How closely should such literary descriptions be connected with actual political and economic institutions? Some historians interpret them partly as reflections of temple administration and royal ideologies. Others emphasize their theological purpose, arguing that sacred compositions cannot simply be treated as disguised economic manuals. Both perspectives recognize that literature and lived society influenced one another. The exact relationship remains complex. A myth can describe divine order while also teaching human audiences what order should look like. That is where the text becomes particularly revealing. Enki does not merely possess wisdom. He makes wisdom practical. He determines where things belong. A river is useful because its water reaches fields. A craft is useful because someone knows how to perform it. A city is useful because institutions organize people. Knowledge becomes structure. Structure becomes survival. This has inspired fringe interpretations claiming that Mesopotamian texts preserve memories of outside teachers who deliberately introduced agriculture, engineering, metallurgy, a government to primitive humanity. The suggestion can sound attractive. Ancient stories do portray civilization as connected with divine instruction. However, archaeology shows long developmental processes rather than one sudden technological delivery. Agriculture emerged through generations of experimentation. Settlements expanded gradually. Craft techniques changed over centuries. Administrative systems became more complex step by step. The historical evidence therefore supports human innovation across long periods. The myths tell the same transformation differently. They compress slow development into sacred intention. That compression is powerful. Thousands of years of experimentation become a divine assignment. The difficult invention of irrigation becomes part of cosmic order. The growth of cities becomes destinies. You look across the plain and begin to understand why. From the perspective of one short human life, ancient institutions seem permanent. A canal may have existed before your grandparents were born. A temple may appear older than memory. A farming tradition may feel as if people always knew it. Eventually, inherited knowledge can seem less invented than received. Someone taught you. Someone taught them. The chain disappears into antiquity. At the invisible beginning, myth places the gods. This is not evidence of hidden engineers. It is evidence of how human societies understand inherited knowledge. Civilization arrives in every generation already partially assembled. You were born into language. You are born into custom. You are born into tools, roads, laws, fields, measurements, and stories created by people you will never meet. Ancient Mesopotamians experienced that inheritance just as deeply. Their explanations gave it a sacred ancestry. The result is a world that feels intentionally arranged. Nothing important stands alone. Cities connect to gods. Crafts connect to divine patrons. Water connects to survival. Work connects to social order. Human responsibility connects to forces larger than individual desire. Perhaps this is the most unsettling part of Enki's ordered world. Human beings appear inside a system that already has expectations. You are not simply placed on the earth to wander freely. There are fields to cultivate, temples to maintain, rivers to manage, animals to tend, cities to serve. The world has been divided into duties. The gods hold their domain. Humans hold theirs. You watch the canal water entering a field beneath the growing sun. It follows a path shaped by human hands, yet the ancient story imagines a deeper design behind that path. The water moves because workers open the gate. The workers move because a society assigned the task. The society survives because countless roles remain connected. And somewhere within sacred imagination, wisdom is not simply knowing the world. Wisdom is placing everything where it belongs. The sound of labour reaches you before sunrise. Wooden baskets scrape against packed earth. Water splashes through narrow channels. Men and women move beneath a paling sky, carrying clay, grain, reeds, and tools towards tasks waiting across the settlement. Work begins early here. For ancient Mesopotamians, labour is not merely an economic necessity. In several creation traditions, it becomes part of the explanation for why human beings exist at all. That idea appears with unusual clarity in the Akkadian composition commonly called the Atri-Hasis story. The surviving versions were copied long after the earliest Sumerian cities emerged, yet the narrative preserves religious ideas rooted deeply within Mesopotamian culture. At the beginning, humanity does not exist. The gods themselves perform difficult labour. A lower group of divine beings digs waterways and maintains the land. Their burden continues for an immense period until exhaustion becomes rebellion. The scene is almost startlingly practical. The gods are tired. They are digging. They have had enough. Eventually, the labouring gods protest against the burden placed upon them. Their tools are destroyed, and the crisis reaches the senior divine powers. A solution must be found. Humanity becomes that solution. You can feel the implication unsettling slowly. In this story, people are not created primarily because the gods feel lonely. They are not made simply to admire the beauty of creation. They are created to work. The purpose is functional. Human beings will assume burdens that divine beings no longer wish to carry. Scholars at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have examined how such creation traditions reflect Mesopotamian ideas about labour, temples, agriculture, and social hierarchy. The connection is understandable. Large ancient institutions depended on enormous amounts of organised work. Canals needed maintenance. Fields needed cultivation. Temple estates required workers. Palaces demanded supplies. Food had to be produced for communities whose administrators, soldiers, priests, and craft workers could not all cultivate their own fields. labor sustained civilization. The creation story places that reality inside cosmic history. You imagine the first humans awakening not in a garden of effortless abundance, but within a world already filled with unfinished tasks. There is soil to turn, water to control, animals to manage, offerings to prepare, cities to maintain. Existence arrives with responsibilities attached. A related Sumerian composition involving Enki and the mother goddess Ninmah also presents human creation in connection with divine labour. Gods complain about their burdens, and a plan emerges for humanity to take over necessary work. The details differ from the Atrahasis tradition, yet the underlying problem feels familiar. Someone must perform the labour. That fact can sound harsh to modern ears. Still, ancient people may have heard something more complicated. Work was exhausting, but work also created order. Fields produced food. Canals sustained cities. Temples maintained relationships with divine powers. Human labour allowed the civilized world to continue. A person therefore occupies a humble position, yet not an insignificant one. You are necessary. Mupul. The gods require something from humanity. This relationship appears vividly in temple practice. Food offerings were prepared for divine images. Bread, meat, beer, dates, oils, and other goods could be presented according to established rituals. Priests tended sacred spaces as households belonging to the gods. Modern readers sometimes ask why immortal beings would need dinner. Ancient ritual does not always obey modern biological logic. An offering establishes service, reciprocity, devotion, and proper order. The god receives honor. The community maintains the relationship. Human beings demonstrate their place within the sacred system. There is a quietly strange detail within the creation tradition. Humanity is not fashioned from clay alone. In the Atrahasis story, clay is combined with material connected to a slain divine being. The exact interpretation of several lines has been debated because ancient manuscripts are damaged and translations remain difficult. Yet the basic image is extraordinary. This is extraordinary. Humanity contains something earthly and something divine. Clay belongs to the ground. The divine contribution belongs to another level of existence. People therefore stand between categories. You are made for labour, yet you are not described as merely an animal trained to carry baskets. Something of the divine enters the mixture. This has become one of the favourite passages of fringe interpretations. Modern alternative writers sometimes claim that the story describes an ancient memory of genetic engineering. Clay becomes biological material. The divine contribution becomes foreign genetic information. The creation process becomes a laboratory procedure carried out by technically advanced beings. It is an imaginative reading. The surviving language does not describe genes, chromosomes, laboratories, microscopes, or technological equipment. Those concepts are modern additions. Mainstream specialists understand the scene as mythic creation expressed through sacred substances, ritual symbolism, and ideas about human mortality. Yet the modern interpretation survives because the ancient question remains powerful. Why does the story describe humanity as deliberately designed for a task? That wording can sound unexpectedly mechanical when heard through modern ears. Purpose invites speculation. Design invites a designer. Labour invites someone who benefits. The ancient answer is theological. The modern fringe answer becomes technological. Between them lies a vast difference in assumptions. Scholars continue debating what social meaning these labour narratives carried for ancient audiences. Some emphasise their connection with temple economies and systems of compulsory work. Others interpret them more broadly as reflections on the difficult human condition. People must labour. Gods appear free from much of that burden. Myth explains the imbalance. Another interpretation focuses on the relationship between service and civilization. Human work may be burdensome, yet it transforms the landscape into habitable order. No single explanation captures every layer. You move through an imagined field where workers bend beneath the afternoon heat. Sweat darkens their clothing. A canal glitters nearby. From a distant temple, smoke rises into the pale sky. Perhaps one worker believes his effort feeds his family. Perhaps another sees it as obligation to an institution. Perhaps a priest describes the same labour as service within divine order. All three perspectives can exist at once. That complexity matters. The creation stories do not necessarily reduce people to disposable servants. Mesopotamian literature also portrays humans praying, loving, building, ruling, grieving, celebrating, obeying, learning, and searching for wisdom. Kings can claim divine favour. Scribes can preserve knowledge. Families can maintain household gods. People can appeal to great deities for justice. Human beings may occupy a lower place than the gods, but they remain essential participants in the world. Still, the purpose of creation carries a quiet discomfort. Humanity appears because there is work that powerful beings prefer not to perform. You can almost hear a weary divine counsel reaching its practical conclusion. Let someone else dig it. It is difficult not to smile. The humour fades when you consider how closely the story resembles ordinary social hierarchy. Those with greater power escape certain burdens. Those beneath them inherit the labour. Ancient audiences knew this pattern well. Farmers supported officials. Workers maintained estates. Soldiers served things. Temple-dependent worked for institutions. Creation itself could therefore resemble the social order visible around them. Perhaps the myth justified that that's hierarchy. Perhaps it questioned it. Perhaps it simply explained why life feels exhausting. The tablets do not tell you exactly how every listener understood the story. They only preserve its unsettling arrangement. Human beings are created because the world requires workers. Their bodies come from Earth. Their existence contains a sacred element. Their labour sustains an order older and larger than themselves. You watch evening gather across the fields. Tools are finally lowered. Hands ache. The canal continues carrying water through the darkness. If the ancient story is taken as theology, humanity is born into service. If it is taken symbolically, labour becomes the price of civilization. If it is taken through a modern, speculative lens, the same lines become something far stranger. Perhaps that ambiguity explains their lasting power. The clay does not tell you that humans were engineered by visitors from another world. It does tell you something almost as uncomfortable. In one of humanity's oldest surviving explanations of itself, people begin because powerful beings need someone to carry the burden. The doorway is narrow, and beyond it stands a table prepared for a guest who does not fully understand the invitation. You are no longer among fields or canal. You are inside a story about knowledge, obedience, mortality, and a human being allowed unusually close to the divine world. His name is Adapa. He is not a king in the usual sense. He is not described as a conqueror. He is a wise man associated with the city of Eridu, and his wisdom comes through a special relationship with the god Enki. Ancient versions of the Adapa story survive on clay tablets written in Akkadian. Copies have been found in different places, including the Royal Library at Nineveh and the Egyptian site of Amarna. That geographic spread is important. It shows that the story travelled far beyond one local temple tradition. Scribes copied it because its questions mattered. What happens when a human receives divine wisdom but remains mortal? What kind of knowledge can be given? What kind must remain withheld? You picture Adapa walking beside the water. He understands rituals. He knows how to perform sacred duties. He possesses exceptional intelligence. The tradition does not present him as an ordinary fisherman, although fishing becomes central to the crisis that changes his fate. One day, Adapa goes out upon the water. A violent wind overturns his boat. In anger, he curses the force responsible and breaks its power. The act is extraordinary. A human being has interfered with a force belonging to the divine order. The consequences reach heaven. Adapa is summoned to appear before Anu, one of the highest gods in the Mesopotamian pantheon. That invitation should sound magnificent. It does not feel safe. You imagine the silence before the journey. Adapa is intelligence, but intelligence does not guarantee survival. He knows enough to realize that powerful beings can destroy as easily as they protect. Enki prepares him. The god gives instructions. Adapa is told how to behave before the divine gatekeepers. He is told what clothing to wear. He is told how to respond. Most importantly, he receives a warning concerning food and drink. He must not consume what is offered. According to Enki, the provisions placed before him will bring death. Adapa obeys. That obedience becomes the center of the mystery. When he reaches the divine presence, events unfold differently from what he expects. Anu becomes impressed. Adapa receives an offer of food and water. But the meal is not described as deadly. It is connected with life. Adapa refuses. He remembers the warning. The food passes from his reach. Mortality remains. The story is strange because the human being does almost everything correctly. He listens. He obeys. He behaves carefully. He survives his encounter with a divine authority. Yet obedience appears to cost him immortality. This is where the tale becomes psychologically fascinating. If Enki knew what would happen, why did he give the warning? Did he misunderstand Anu's intentions? Was he protecting Adapa? Was he deliberately preventing humanity from gaining eternal life? The surviving tablets do not provide one simple answer. Scholars at Oxford, Yale, and other institutions studying ancient Near Eastern literature have debated the meaning of this episode for generations. Some interpretations emphasize human mortality. Others focus on wisdom and its limits. Some scholars see tension between competing divine powers. Another approach treats the story as an explanation for why even the wisest humans still die. The uncertainty is not a flaw. It may be the reason the story endured. Adapa receives knowledge. But not everything. That distinction is crucial. He possesses enough wisdom to live within a sacred system. He does not possess the final privilege of the gods. There is a boundary. Wisdom can cross it. Immortality cannot. You sense how different this is from a simple tale of divine generosity. The gods do not merely hand humanity unlimited power. Knowledge appears controlled. Access appears conditional. Even a favoured human can approach the divine sphere and leave with less than he might have received. One unusual detail makes the story even more intriguing. Adapa does not simply wander into heaven. He is summoned because his actions have disturbed cosmic order. His extraordinary knowledge allows him to affect forces normally beyond human control. That makes him useful, dangerous, or perhaps both. A human who knows too much becomes a problem. Modern fringe interpretations sometimes seize upon this feature. They imagine Adapa as a genetically altered human, a priestly intermediary, or a member of an elite group trained by advanced non-human teachers. Some versions even portray the food of life as a lost biological upgrade. The tablets do not describe anything resembling genetic modification. There are no laboratories, machines, or scientific procedures. The language belongs to myth, ritual, and theology. Still, the speculative interpretation reveals why the story attracts modern attention. Knowledge is granted selectively. A human interacts directly with superior beings. Immortality is available, then withheld. The structure feels almost experimental. But ancient stories often make divine privileges difficult to obtain. The lesson need not be technological. It can be philosophical. You consider the possibility that immortality was never truly within human reach. Perhaps the offer exists only to explain the tragedy of mortality. Adapa is wise enough to stand before the gods, but not wise enough to know when his own instructions have become dangerous. That is a painful kind of intelligence. You know many things. You still cannot see the entire board. The gods possess information you do not. Even your trusted protector may not reveal everything. The story quietly challenges the comforting belief that knowledge always produces freedom. Sometimes knowledge creates dependence. You obey because you know enough to be afraid. You refuse because someone wiser told you to refuse. Then you discover that caution itself closed the door. There is gentle irony here. Adapa survives the journey through perfect obedience and loses eternal life for exactly the same reason. Ancient literature can be cruelly elegant. You imagine Anu watching him refuse the meal. Perhaps there is surprise, perhaps disappointment, perhaps something closer to recognition. This human creature has reached the threshold. He will not cross it. The distance between gods and immortals remains intact. That separation appears throughout Mesopotamian thought. Gods can possess extraordinary duration. Humans live briefly. Kings may achieve fame. Priests may approach sacred images. Scribes may preserve names across centuries. But ordinary biological life still ends. Wisdom cannot cancel that fact. Adap embodies the frustration perfectly. He is not ignorant. He is exceptionally informed. And still he dies. This creates another scholarly question. Was the story meant to explain mortality for humanity generally, or was it primarily concerned with a special priestly figure whose wisdom had unusual ritual significance? The surviving evidence allows several possibilities. Some historians connect Adapa with traditions concerning ancient sages who carried sacred knowledge into early civilization. Others emphasize literary themes rather than historical memory. The figure stands somewhere between culture hero, priestly model, and mythic human. You are left with a simple image. A table is prepared. Food waits. Water waits. The offer is real within the structure. Adapa does not touch it. His hands remain still. There is no dramatic punishment. No thunder shakes the chamber. No sword falls. The opportunity simply passes. That may be the most unsettling detail. Humanity does not lose immortality through open rebellion. It loses it through uncertainty. A warning is trusted. A gift is refused. The door closes quietly. You walk away with wisdom still intact. You carry knowledge of ritual, order, and sacred relationships. You understand more than ordinary people, yet your body remains human. Perhaps this is the deeper tension preserved in Adapa's story. Human beings can come remarkably close to divine knowledge without becoming divine themselves. They can receive instructions. They can enter sacred spaces. They can influence the world through skill and wisdom. But something remains withheld. The boundary survives. You leave the imagined chamber and feel the air grow cooler. Behind you, The untouched meal remains upon the table. No one calls you back. No one calls you back. The gods keep what they possess. The human keeps what he has been given. And somewhere between wisdom and immortality lies a distance that even the cleverest mortal cannot safely measure. Rain does not begin dramatically. At first, you hear only a faint tapping against the roof. Then the sound thickens. Water gathers in channels, rises along walls, and turns familiar streets into dark moving paths. People lift baskets from floors. Animals become restless. Doors are reinforced with whatever timber can be found. The sky continues pouring. In ancient Mesopotamian tradition, floods were not merely natural disasters, they became thresholds between ages. One of the most famous flood stories appears in the Atrahasis tradition, where the gods decide that humanity has become too numerous and troublesome. The reasons are strikingly human. People make noise. Their numbers grow. The divine world becomes disturbed. The complaint sounds almost absurdly domestic. Even the gods, apparently, can become irritated by noisy neighbours. Yet the consequences are enormous. A decision is made to reduce humanity. Before the final flood, other disasters are attempted. Disease comes. Famine follows. The suffering grows. Still, humanity survives. Then the gods choose war. The flood is intended to erase human life. But one god refuses to allow complete destruction. Enki finds a way to warn a man named Atrahasis without openly violating the divine decision. The method is clever. Rather than speaking directly to the man, Enki addresses a ward. Atrahasis happens to hear. The god can therefore claim obedience while accomplishing the opposite. Ancient literature occasionally rewards technicalities. You can almost imagine a divine official insisting that the rules were followed perfectly. Atrahasis receives instructions to build a vessel. He gathers supplies. His household enters. Animals are taken aboard. Craft workers may be included according to some interpretations of the damaged text. Then the storm comes. The surviving description is frightening because it strips away heroic certainty. The gods themselves become afraid. They retreat. Some lament what has happened. The mother goddess mourns the destruction of the people she helped create. The flood is not presented as a clean victory. It becomes a catastrophe even for those who approved it. Scholars at institutions including Oxford and the University of Pennsylvania have compared the surviving Mesopotamian flood traditions across different languages and periods. These stories vary in names and details, but they share a recognizable structure. A divine decision threatens humanity. One person receives what? A vessel is built. Life survives. Afterward, sacrifice restores communication between humans and gods. The flood therefore does not end the relationship. That detail is essential. When the waters withdraw, divine beings do not disappear from the story. They remain involved. They negotiate a new arrangement with humanity. The problem of human population is addressed through mortality, infertility, and other limits rather than another complete destruction. The relationship changes. It does not end. You step into the imagined vessel. The air is crowded and damp. Wood creaks. Animals shift against one another. Stored food gives off a heavy smell of grain, oil, wool, and fear. Outside, water strikes the structure with relentless force. There is no horizon. There is only storms. A flood large enough to destroy a settlement can easily become the whole world to the people trapped inside it. This possibility interests archaeologists because southern Mesopotamia was genuinely vulnerable to severe flooding. Excavations at several ancient sites have uncovered layers of river-deposited sediment between periods of human occupation. One famous example comes from the city of Shuruppak, where evidence indicates a significant flood during the early 3rd millennium before the Common Era. The discovery has often been discussed in relation to later flood traditions. Yet scholars remain cautious. A flood layer at one settlement does not prove a single event covered every inhabited region. Researchers continue debating whether Mesopotamian flood stories preserve memory of one especially destructive event, repeated local disasters, literary borrowing, theological symbolism, or several of these influences combined. The answer remains open. That uncertainty leaves room for imagination. Perhaps survivors carried stories between cities. Perhaps each settlement added its own remembered catastrophe. Perhaps generations of floods merged into one enormous ancestral disaster. Or perhaps that a particular event became so culturally important that later communities reshaped it repeatedly. Memory can compress centuries. Myth can compress them further. The flood survivor eventually appears under different names in different compositions. In one Sumerian tradition, the survivor is Yusudra. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, he is Utnapishtim. The stories are related but not identical. Each preserves a different literary world. Utnapishtim's account is especially haunting because he tells his story to Gilgamesh, a king desperate to escape death. The flood survivor has received extraordinary life. Gilgamesh wants the same secret. The flood therefore becomes connected not only with destruction, but also with the human desire to outlast mortalities. One quirky feature of the Mesopotamian traditions is the role of sacrifice after survival. When the survivor makes an offering, the gods gather around its scent. The image is surprisingly physical. Divine beings drawn toward the aroma of roasted offerings. Modern readers sometimes find the scene almost humorous. The ancient meaning is more serious. Sacrifice restores the broken relationship between worlds. Smoke rises. The gods gather. Communication resumes. Some modern fringe theories interpret the vessel as advanced technology, a preserved genetic archive, or even an engineered survival facility operated under non-human supervision. The texts do not describe such machinery. They speak in the language of boats, divine warnings, storms, sacrifice, and sacred decisions. Yet the speculative reading grows from one striking feature. Someone is warned in advance. Someone preserves life. Someone survives a destruction meant for everyone. Knowledge creates survival. That pattern is ancient enough to feel almost archetypal. You imagine the water finally becoming quiet. The silence may be worse than the storm. The vessel rests somewhere beyond the drowned landscape. The survivor opens a way to test the outside world. Birds are released. One returns. Another does not. The details vary across traditions, but the emotional logic remains clear. You do not simply step outside. You wait. You test. You listen. Then land becomes possible again. The world smells different after a flood. Mud dominates everything. Dead vegetation settles against walls and banks. Fields lose their boundaries. Roads disappear. Buildings become softened shapes beneath sediment. The survivor stands within a landscape that feels unfinished. Yet survival itself creates a new beginning. Humanity continues. Cities return. Fields are cultivated. Offerings resume. Children are born. The divine world remains present within the story. That continuation complicates modern claims that the Anunnaki or other Mesopotamian gods simply abandoned Earth after some ancient catastrophe. The flood traditions do not describe a permanent departure. They describe negotiation. The gods reconsider human existence. They establish limitations. They continue interacting with mortals. The catastrophe changes the terms of life rather than closing divine involvement completely. This does not prove that supernatural beings physically remained on Earth. The texts are religious literature, not scientific reports. But within their own narrative logic, disappearance is not the conclusion. Presence continues in another form. You stand on damp ground as clouds separate above the plain. Sunlight directs the widow. A thin reflection trembles across the surface. The settlement that once existed may be gone. The people who survived must begin again. Somewhere in their memory remains the knowledge that destruction nearly became complete. Perhaps that memory is why flood stories endure so powerfully. They preserve a fear older than writing. Everything familiar can vanish. And yet something survives. A family. A name. A story. A ritual. A relationship between humans and forces believed to stand above them. The water recedes. The silence remains. Humanity steps onto the mud and continues living beneath the same sky. Cold air seems to rise from somewhere beneath the floor. You stand at the edge of a world the living are not meant to enter willingly. There is no bright temple courtyard here, no irrigated field, and no marketplace filled with voices. The path slopes downward. Ancient Mesopotamians imagined death as movement into a hidden realm beneath ordinary human life. This underworld was not usually a paradise reserved for the righteous, or a place designed solely to punish the wicked. It was the destination of the dead. Kings entered it. Farmers entered it. Priests entered it. Children entered it. Wealth could change the conditions of life, but mortality eventually ignored social ambition with impressive consistency. One of the most vivid journeys into this realm appears in the Sumerian story commonly known as the Descent of Inanna. Inanna is a major goddess associated with love, power, warfare, fertility, and political authority. She decides to descend into the underworld ruled by her sister Ereshkigal. The reason for her descent remains debated. Some interpretations connect it with divine ambition. Others emphasize ritual meaning, seasonal symbolism, or the complicated relationship between the two goddesses. The story does not give modern readers one comfortable explanation. You follow Inanna toward the entrance. A gate stands before her. Then another. There are 7 gates. At each one, part of her clothing or divine regalia is removed. A crown disappears. Jewelry is taken. Garments follow. The process continues until the powerful goddess enters the deepest chamber stripped of the symbols that marked her status. Power does not travel downward easily. The underworld has its own rules. This detail fascinated scribes because Inanna is not an ordinary visitor. She is one of the great divine figures of Mesopotamian religion. Yet even she must submit to the procedures of the place. There is a gatekeeper. There are instructions. There is authority. Death is organized. Inside the underworld, Inanna faces Ereshkigal and a group identified in the composition as the Anunna. 7 of them appear as judges. They direct their gaze toward Inanna. The judgment is fatal. She is transformed into a corpse and suspended. The image is severe, but the narrative remains focused less on physical horror than on complete loss of power. A goddess enters. A powerless body remains. For scholars studying Mesopotamian religion at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago, passages like this help it establish that the Anunna could be associated with judicial authority in the underworld. This creates a very different picture from the popular image of celestial visitors arriving from remote stars. Here, the group is connected with death. Their authority lies beneath the living world. They judge. They do not mine gold. They do not pilot machines. They preside over an invisible realm that every human being eventually approaches. You can almost hear the stance of that court. No cheering follows the decision. No crowd gathers. The judgment simply happens. Ancient Mesopotamian descriptions of the underworld are often bleak. The dead are sometimes imagined existing in darkness, surrounded by dust dependent upon offerings made by living relatives. A person's condition could be influenced by burial, family remembrance, and the continuation of funerary care. This made memory practical. If descendants poured water or provided offerings, the dead were not entirely abandoned. Family duty continued beyond burial. One unusual feature of these traditions is their almost administrative treatment of death. The underworld has rulers, it has gates, it has messengers, it has judges, it even has procedures governing entry and release. Apparently eternity also developed bureaucracy. The thought that carries gentle sarcasm, but the pattern is striking. Mesopotamian imagination frequently describes hidden realms through structures familiar from human society. A palace has guards, so does the underworld. A king has officials, so does the queen of the dead. A court issues judgments, so do the divine judges beneath the earth. This resemblance may help explain why such myths felt comprehensible to ancient listeners. The supernatural remained strange, but it was not completely without structure. The story of Inanna does not end with her permanent confinement. Her disappearance has consequences in the living world, and divine assistance eventually makes her release possible. Yet there is a condition. Someone must take her place. The underworld does not casually surrender what has entered its domain. This exchange reveals another important principle. Movement between realms has a cost. A divine being may cross boundaries, but boundaries remain real. The living and the dead are not supposed to circulate freely. Order depends upon separation. That idea appears in many Mesopotamian stories involving ghosts and funerary ritual. The dead belong below. The living belong above. When that arrangement breaks, fear follows. A restless ghost might trouble a household. Improper burial could create anxiety. Ritual specialists could be consulted to restore balance. Death therefore remains close without becoming ordinary. You sleep above it. You farm above it. You build houses above it. Beneath your everyday world lies a second geography filled with beings, laws, and judgments. This is where modern fringe interpretation sometimes takes an unexpected turn. Some speculative writers imagine ancient descriptions of subterranean divine realms as distorted memories of underground settlements, hidden technological facilities, or surviving non-human communities. The connection is imaginative rather than archaeological. Excavations have not revealed advanced underground cities corresponding to the mythological underworld. The texts themselves speak in religious language concerned with death, divine authority, ritual boundaries, and cosmic geography. Still, the image remains powerful. A group associated with the Anunnaki is not described as departing into distant space. It is placed beneath humanity. That does not make the underworld a physical headquarters. It does change the direction of the ancient imagination. You look upward. Nothing's there but imagined stone and packed earth. The stars are far away. The judges are not. They occupy a realm directly below the world of breathing people. This relationship creates a subtle unease. Every city stands above the dead. Every palace stands above the dead. Every temple stands above the dead. The living world is therefore never entirely separate from what lies beneath it. Burial itself makes this literal. Bodies return to the ground. Names accumulate households. Offerings descend. Memory keeps communication open. Scholars still debate exactly how consistently the Anunnaki were associated with underworld judgment across different periods of Mesopotamian history. Their roles vary between compositions, and later traditions do not preserve one fixed description. That variation matters. A divine group could belong to different cosmic settings depending on the text being copied. The name carried authority more consistently than it carried one permanent address. You descend another imagined step. The air grows cooler. The gatekeeper waits somewhere below. You do not need to see him to understand the rule. Everything living is temporary. Cities may survive centuries. Kings may carve their names into stone. Scribes may press words into clay. Eventually, each person enters the same hidden geographies. In that world, divine judgment continues beyond the reach of human government. Perhaps this is why the underworld traditions feel so persistent. They place unseen authority exactly where human certainty ends. The Anunnaki do not need to return from anywhere within such a story. Some are already positioned at the final boundary of human life. They wait where every road eventually narrows. They belong to the place no traveller can avoid forever. You remain at the threshold. The darkness does not move. Somewhere beneath the imagined earth, 7 judges sit in silence. The living continue walking above them. Warm bread enters the temple before sunrise. You smell it before you see the baskets. Fresh loaves rest beside jars of beer, bowls of dates, cuts of meat, scented oils, and carefully prepared vegetables. Servants move through narrow passages while lamps burn against walls of mud brick. Nothing about the activity feels symbolic to the people performing it. A household is being maintained. The resident happens to be a god. Across ancient Mesopotamia, major temples were understood as divine houses rather than simple meeting halls for worshippers. A temple belonged to its deity, and the institutions surrounding it could control land, workshops, animals, workers, storerooms, and large quantities of food. The sacred residence had an economy. It also had routines. Priests prepared offerings. Musicians performed. Textile workers produced garments. Brewers supplied beer. Cooks prepared meals. Cleaners maintained rooms that ordinary people might never enter. This is one of the clearest archaeological and textual facts preserved from Mesopotamian civilization. Administrative tablets studied by researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and the British Museum record immense quantities of goods moving through temple institutions. These were not tiny shrines surviving on occasional occasional donations. Some temples operated at a remarkable scale. You walk through an imagined complex while the city awakens outside. The outer courtyard is busy. Workers carry sacks. Animals are led toward enclosed areas. A scribe sits near a doorway, recording deliveries by pressing signs into damp clay. Farther inside, movement becomes quieter. Access narrows. The most sacred chambers are not public spaces where crowds gather for weekly services. They are controlled environments. The god has a bedroom. The god has the furniture. The god receives clothing. The god receives meals. The god can even possess jewelry, weapons, vehicles, and property. Modern listeners sometimes find this surprisingly domestic. Ancient worshippers did not. If a deity truly resides within a city, then the divine household must be cared for properly. The central cult image plays an important role in this system. A divine statue was not merely decorative art placed inside a temple. Through rituals, it could become a sacred body through which the deity was understood to be present. Priests washed it. They dressed it. They adorned it. Meals were placed before it. Music and incense accompanied its daily existence. The relationship between object and deity remains difficult to express in modern language. The statue was crafted by human hands, yet ritual transformed its sphere. It became more than wood, stone, or metal. Ancient texts describe ceremonies in which a newly made divine image underwent purification before entering sacred service. One ritual tradition symbolically separated the craftsman from responsibility for making the statue. The implication is subtle. Human artisans may have shaped the object, but the deity's presence could not be reduced to human manufacture. That distinction created sacred distance. Scholars continue debating exactly how ancient Mesopotamians understood the relationship between divine essence and physical cult image. Some emphasize the statue as a genuine embodiment of presence, while others stress that the deity was never considered limited to a single object. The evidence suggests both closeness and transcendence. A god could inhabit the temple while also acting elsewhere. This flexible presence becomes essential to understanding divine residence. You stand near a closed doorway. Beyond it sits a statue hidden from ordinary eyes. The god is local enough to receive breakfasts. Yet the same god may also control storms, rivers, warfare, justice, or celestial movement across vast distances. The contradiction does not seem to trouble the ancient system. Presence can exist at several scales. A divine being can belong to one city and still possess cosmic authority. The temple therefore functions as an earthly address without becoming a prison. That idea becomes especially revealing during political conflict. When armies conquered cities, they sometimes carried away divine statues. This was not simply theft of valuable artwork. Removing the image could signify that the defeated city's god had been captured, displaced, or withdrawn. The loss was religious and political. A victorious king might later return a stolen statue and present the act as restoration of proper cosmic order. Records from several Mesopotamian periods confirm such movements of cult images during warfare. The gods could travel because their sacred representations travelled. Yet their identities continued. A city might lose possession of its divine image without the deity ceasing to exist. This gave political catastrophe a sacred dimension. You can imagine citizens standing outside a damaged temple after conquest. The doors are open. Storerooms have been emptied. The sanctuary is vacant. The familiar statue is gone. For people accustomed to feeding, clothing, and honouring a divine resident, such emptiness would feel more severe than architectural destruction. Someone has left the house. One quirky detail makes the divine household feel almost unexpectedly intimate. Temple records sometimes list different foods according to specific offerings and ritual occasions, revealing menus that could be more varied than many ordinary families enjoyed. The gods, it appears, dined very well. No one wanted a major deity surviving on stale barley cakes and administrative optimism. Yet the abundance served a lusrivos purpose. Offerings displayed respect. They redistributed resources through temple personnel. They reinforced hierarchy. They connected agricultural production with religious obligation. A meal placed before a divine image could eventually support human workers attached to the temple institution. Sacred service and economic life overlapped. This complexity has encouraged some fringe interpretations. Modern alternative theories occasionally describe Mesopotamian temples as physical residences built for advanced beings who lived among humans. Food deliveries become provisions for biological visitors. Restricted sanctuaries become secure private quarters. Priestly servants become attendants assigned to powerful non-human rulers. The archaeological evidence does not require that conclusion. Temples fit known patterns of ancient religion to spiritual, politics, and economy. No excavated sanctuary has produced clear evidence of advanced machinery or non-human habitation. Still, the ancient language of residence deserves attention. The gods are treated as present, not remembered, not merely represented, present. This is one reason the question of a divine departure becomes difficult within Mesopotamian thought. A deity could leave a city in anger. A statue could be removed. A temple could be destroyed. Yet the sacred system allowed presence to return. A ruined sanctuary could be rebuilt. A cult image could be restored. Offerings could resume. The god's household could become active again. Divine absence was therefore reversible. You watch servants entering the sanctuary with the evening meal. They move carefully. Every gesture follows established procedure. A lamp is adjusted. A vessel is placed. A door closes. The city outside continues trading, arguing, drinking, marrying, borrowing, and complaining. Inside, the divine household maintains another rhythm. Morning meal. Or meals, du som teater. Evening offerings. Festival clothing. Music. Purification. Processions. Season after season, humans behave as though an unseen resident remains part of civic life. That continuity may matter more than spectacular appearances. The god does not need to descend through the clouds every morning. Presence is maintained through ritual. Memory becomes routines. Routine becomes institution. Institution becomes something almost permanent. Generations are born into a city where the deity already has a house. Children grow older knowing which god protects their community. Priests die. New priests replace them. Kings change. The divine residence continues receiving offerings. Centuries can pass. Eventually, the god feels older than the city itself. You pause in the courtyard as wax smoke mixes with the scent of bread. A bell does not ring. No crowd applauds. The sacred household continues quietly. Perhaps that quietness is what makes the idea so enduring. The ancient gods were not always expected to arrive with spectacle. They could remain through habitation, through images, through ritual, through property, through daily acts repeated deceit until presence became part of the architecture. The temple walls hold no proof that supernatural beings physically occupied them. Yet they preserve something historically certain. Entire cities organize labor, wealth, ceremony, and political identity around the conviction that divine residents had not gone anywhere at all. A stone stair rises beneath your feet toward a platform overlooking the sleeping city. Torches burn along the walls. Below, narrow streets disappear between houses, workshops, courtyards, and temple buildings. Somewhere in the darkness, guards change position while officials prepare for another day of counting grain, settling disputes, and carrying messages. Above them stands the king. Yet in Mesopotamian thought, kingship is not simply a human invention. It descends. One of the most remarkable surviving traditions appears in a composition commonly called the Sumerian king list. The text presents a sequence of rulers and cities stretching across an extraordinary span of time. Its opening claim is simple and powerful. Kingship comes down from heaven. Then a city receives it. That phrase transforms government into something sacred. A ruler may sit on a throne made by craftsmen, but the authority behind the throne belongs to a higher order. You can imagine how persuasive this would sound in a world where political stability is fragile. Cities compete. Dynasties collapse. Armies grow. Crops are filled. Rulers are assassinated. Canals change hands. A king who claims merely personal ambition sounds temporary. A king who claims heavenly authorization sounds inevitable. The king list turns that idea into cringy. Kingship moves from city to city. One center redes, another receives authority. Political power becomes almost like a sacred object passed through history. Researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have studied different copies of the king list and the historical problems hidden within it. Some rulers can be connected with figures known from archaeology or independent inscription. Others remain uncertain. The earliest reigns are extraordinaries. Their lengths stretch far beyond normal human lifespans. A single ruler may govern for thousands of years. Another reign lasts tens of thousands. You look at the numbers and feel the ground shifting beneath ordinary history. These are not plausible biological reigns. Mainstream historians generally treat them as literary, ideological, symbolic, or numerical constructions rather than straightforward chronological records. Still, the numbers are deliberate. Someone chose them. Someone copied them. Someone believed they belonged within the story of kingship. The question is why. Ancient Mesopotamian mathematics used numerical systems very different from the decimal habits familiar today. Numbers could carry practical, symbolic, and religious significance depending upon context. A massive reign might therefore express something other than literal duration. Perhaps the earliest rulers belonged to sacred time. Perhaps enormous numbers separate primordial kings from ordinary historical rulers. Perhaps scribal mathematics creates patterns whose full meaning is no longer recoverable. Scholars continue debating how these numerical traditions developed and what political purpose the king list served in different periods. No single explanation settles every. Very cool. That uncertainty gives the text its peculiar atmosphere. You begin with government. You end inside mythology. The earliest rulers stand at such a distance that they almost cease resembling ordinary kings. Their world seems larger. Time behaves differently around them. Then catastrophe interrupts the sequence. A flood arrives. Kingship must descend again. The wording creates a rhythm of loss and restoration. Authority can disappear from one place without disappearing from existence. A city falls. Kingship survives. Another city receives it. This idea matters because it makes political power independent of any single dynasty. Kings die. Heavenly authorization continues. The institution outlives the person. You can almost hear a court scribe explaining the arrangement to a newly crowned ruler. You are important. Do not become too comfortable. The throne existed without you. It can continue without you. There is a gentle cruelty in that message. Mesopotamian kings often worked hard to present themselves as uniquely favoured by the gods. Royal inscriptions praise their strength, wisdom, justice, buildings through projects, military victories, and piety. Modesty rarely receives much space. Yet the large ideology places every ruler beneath divine authority. The king governs because the gods permit it. A failed ruler can lose favour. A defeated dynasty can be replaced. The system remains sacred even when individual rulers collapse. One quirky feature of ancient kingship makes the relationship between ruler and deity especially vivid. Some kings were elevated to divine status during their own lifetimes or shortly afterward. Their names could receive a divine determinative in writing, and temples or cult practices might honour them. This did not make every ruler a god. Far from it. Most kings remained mortal servants of higher deities. But the boundary between human and divine authority could have occasionally become unusually thin. Modern fringe interpretation seized upon that blurred boundary. Some writers claim the earliest kings were not symbolic figures at all, but members of a physically different ruling population. The enormous reigns become evidence of exceptional longevity. The descent of kingship becomes the arrival of an advanced governing class. The ancient city becomes a colony administered under non-human supervision. The texts do not demonstrate this. No archaeological evidence confirms rulers living for thousands of years. Human remains from Mesopotamia show ordinary human biologies. Royal monuments, administrative documents, and settlement layers fit a recognizable human civilization. Yet the speculative reading survives because the king list itself refuses to look ordinaries. Its earliest chronology is intentionally impossible by everyday standards. That invites questions. Why would scribes preserve impossible reigns beside historical rulers? Perhaps they did not perceive them as impossible in the same way. Sacred time can operate differently from human timers. A primordial king may represent an age when the world was closer to divine order. As generations progress, reigns become shorter. History gradually becomes recognizable. The pattern feels like a descent from myth into human scales. You stand inside a palace courtyard at dawn. An official approaches with a clay tablet. The king listens. There are disputes to settle. Workers bidden assignments. An enemy city has moved troops. A temple requires repairs. The divine origin of kingship does not eliminate administration. It intensifies responsibility. A sacred office still has practical problems. This combination defines Mesopotamian rulership. The king is elevated yet busy. He may be praised as a shepherd of his people. He may construct walls. He may restore canals. He may sponsor temples. He may judge disputes. His cosmic legitimacy must produce earthly results. If fields fail and enemies invade, divine favour becomes harder to advertise. Royal ideology therefore joins heaven to ordinary governance. The connection appears repeatedly in inscriptions. A ruler builds because a god commanded him. He conquers because a god granted victory. He restores a temple because divine order requires restoration. Political action becomes sacred duty. That framework raises another scholarly debate. Was the king list primarily a historical record, a political argument, a theological composition, or a scribal attempt to organise competing traditions? Most specialists see several purposes working together. The text preserves genuine names while arranging them within an ideological sequence. It does not behave like a modern history book. It behaves like memory-disciplined by poet. You can feel that discipline in the movement of kingship. One city possesses authority, then another. The transfer is never random within the story. Power has direction. It has legitimacy. It has a source. Heaven stands above the sequence like an invisible treasury from which rulership is issued. This does not prove that literal beings descended through the atmosphere and established monarchy. The language belongs to the sacred kingship. Still, the idea creates an enduring pattern. Human government is presented as something received rather than invented. Authority arrives already carrying expectations. People build palaces around it. Priests bless it. Scribes record it. Armies defend it. Generations obey it. Eventually, the political system feels older than memory. You step toward the throne as morning light enters the hall. The chair is empty for a moment. That emptiness reveals something important. A king is temporary. Kingship is not. The office waits for another human body. The divine authorization remains available. A new name will be written. Another reign will begin. And somewhere within the ancient imagination, the authority seated upon that throne does not originate in the man who occupies it. It comes from somewhere higher, descending quietly into human history. Night settles over the rooftops, and the heat finally begins to loosen its grip. You climb a high terrace where the city seems quieter than it did below. Lamps glow inside courtyards, dogs bark somewhere beyond the walls, and a faint smell of smoke drifts upward. Above you, the sky's astonishingly clear. Stars fill almost every direction. For Mesopotamian observers, that darkness was not empty space. The heavens formed a vast surface of signs whose movements could carry meaning for kings, cities, harvests, wars, and entire kingdoms. Watching the sky became serious work. Trained observers recorded the appearances of planets, eclipses, unusual clouds, storms, and changes in the moon. Their reports eventually contributed to one of the longest traditions of systematic astronomical observation in the ancient world. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have shown how carefully Babylonian scholars preserved celestial records across generations. Their tablets demonstrate sustained attention to recurring patterns rather than occasional curiosity. They watched because repetition mattered. A planet appears. It disappears. Months later, it returns. The moon changes shape according to a recognizable rhythm. Certain stars rise during particular seasons. Eclipses arrive less predictably, making them especially disturbing. You stand beside an observer holding a small clay tablet. He is not gazing upwards merely because the stars are beautiful. He is working. If the moon appears unusually late, he notices. If Venus changes position, he notices. If an eclipse darkens part of the lunar surface, scribes may record its timing and direction. The heavens are being read. Mesopotamian divination often treated celestial events as messages concerning events below. A particular configuration might be interpreted as favourable for one kingdom and dangerous for another. This connection between heaven and earth rested upon an important assumption. The universe communicated. Signs did not necessarily force events to happen. Instead, they could reveal divine intentions, warnings, or possibilities already forming within the cosmic order. That distinction made observation useful. A warning could sometimes encourage ritual action. If an omen threatened the king, priests might perform ceremonies intended to reduce the danger. Knowledge therefore offered preparation. You can imagine the tension surrounding an eclipse. The moon begins to darken. People look upward. A familiar object is changing without human permission. Today you understand the event through orbital motion and shadow. Ancient observers possessed no modern astrophysics, yet they accumulated enough records to recognize patterns with remarkable accuracy. Over centuries, prediction improved. That achievement did not require them to stop believing in omens. Science and divination were not separate compartments in their intellectual world. The same scholar could calculate celestial cycles and interpret their political meaning. To modern habits of thought, this combination can seem contradictory. To them, precision made interpretation stronger. If the heavens carried messages, then careless observation would be almost insulting. One remarkable body of evidence comes from astronomical diaries produced by Babylonian scholars. These tablets could record planetary positions, lunar events, weather, river conditions, commodity prices, and political developments. Sky and city shared the same clay surface. That detail tells you something important. Observers were searching for relationships. A movement in the heavens might matter because something happened on Earth around the same time. Generation after generation, information accumulated. Some records extended across centuries. This was patient work. Very patient. A modern observer annoyed by waiting 5 minutes for a cloud to move might not have enjoyed the profession. The ancient scholar needed another temperament. You wait through cold nights. You watch horizons. You memorize stars. You compare tablets copied by people who died long before your birth. The universe becomes a long conversation conducted across generations. One quirky detail is especially charming. Some astronomical records include mundane earthly information alongside majestic celestial events. Grain prices and planetary movements can occupy neighbouring entries. Mars may be behaving ominously, but barley still costs what barley costs. The combination feels wonderfully human. Cosmic anxiety does not cancel grocery concerns. Yet beneath that ordinary detail lies a sophisticated intellectual habit. Observers record rather than merely remember. Memory changes. Clay remains. A strange event seen once may become a story. The same event recorded repeatedly becomes a pattern. This gradual accumulation allowed Babylonian scholars to identify cycles that later supported mathematical astronomy of extraordinary refinement. By the first millennium before the Common Era, scholars could use numerical procedures to anticipate certain celestial phenomena. Their methods were not modern physics. They were still powerful. Open scholarly debate continues over how particular astronomical techniques developed and how knowledge moved between Mesopotamia and later Greek intellectual traditions. Historians agree that Babylonian astronomy became highly advanced, but that the precise pathways of transmission remain complicated. Ideas travel through merchants, scribes, courts, conquest, and translation. Their journeys are rarely preserved neatly. The sky itself creates another question. What exactly did ancient people mean when they described a divine being through a celestial body? Several major gods were associated with planets or other heavenly phenomena. Venus could represent the goddess of love and warfare. The sun belonged to a divine power associated with justice. The moon carried its own sacred identity. This does not mean ancient worshippers simply believed a physical planet possessed a human body floating inside it. Religious identification could operate through symbolism, presence, manifestation, and divine association simultaneously. A god might be connected with a celestial object without being limited to that object. This subtlety becomes important when modern fringe theories enter the picture. Some speculative writers interpret Mesopotamian astronomical language as evidence that the gods were physical travelers associated with particular planets. Divine descent becomes interplanetary travel. Heavenly signs become navigation. Sacred stars become homeworlds. The tablets do not clearly describe such a system. They contain sophisticated astronomy and elaborate theology, but those things should not automatically be converted into spacecraft and planetary colonies. Still, the ancient connection between gods and visible celestial movement creates fertile ground for speculation. You can understand why. Imagine living beneath a sky without electric lighting. Venus shines intensely near the horizon. Mars appears reddish. Jupiter moves slowly through familiar constellations. The moon transforms nightly. These objects behave unlike ordinary stars. They wander. They disappear. They return. A culture that associates them with divine personalities begins seeing the heavens as active rather than decorative. Return becomes especially significant. A celestial body vanishes into the sunlight and later appears again. To ancient observers, disappearance does not necessarily mean absence. Something can become invisible while continuing its cycle. That concept has enormous symbolic power. You do not need to see a divine sign every night for the associated power to remain meaningful. Visibility changes. Presence may not. This is where modern expectations of returning gods can quietly borrow from ancient celestial rhythms. A being connected with a recurring planet already belongs to a pattern of departure and reappearance. The sky teaches the pattern repeatedly. Gone. Hidden. Visible again. Yet the historical evidence points toward religious astronomy, not a timetable for extraterrestrial arrival. No authenticated Mesopotamian tablet provides a modern calendar date announcing the physical return of the Anunnaki to Earth. Claims of such predictions depend upon much later interpretations. The ancient material is stranger in a different way. It presents a world where the heavens continuously communicate with the human affairs. Nothing important needs to arrive now. 5 is a day. The message is already overhead. You remain on the terrace while the city grows darker. An observer marks another position on clay. He does not know that people thousands of years later will study his records. He does not need to know. His responsibility is tonight. A planet approaches the horizon. The moon moves through its cycles. Stars turn slowly above the plain. Below, kings rule, merchants bargain, families sleep, and priests prepare rituals for signs they believe may concern them all. The observer keeps watching. To him, the sky is not silent. It is simply speaking very slowly. A pale point of light hangs close to the horizon. You watch it through a dry evening haze, while a scribe nearby studies a tablet covered with celestial names. Somewhere in the ancient record appears a word that modern audiences have transformed into one of the most famous mysteries associated with Mesopotamia. Nibiru. Today, that name is often presented as though it identified a hidden planet moving through deep space on an immense orbit. According to popular speculation, this distant world periodically approaches Earth and carries beings connected with the Anunnaki. The ancient evidence is more complicated. In Mesopotamian astronomical and religious texts, Nibiru does not consistently behave like the name of one unknown planet with one fixed modern orbit. The word can carry the sense of a crossing or crossing point. Its astronomical identification changes according to context. In some texts, scholars associate Nibiru with Jupiter. In other settings, the term may relate to a particular position or celestial role rather than one permanent object. This variation matters. Researchers studying Babylonian astronomy at institutions including Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have shown that Mesopotamian celestial terminology can shift between periods, genres, and scholarly traditions. A modern reader often wants one name to equal one object. Ancient astronomical language can be less obedient. You lean closer to the tablet. The signs do not offer a convenient diagram of the solar system. There is no enormous elliptical orbit drawn around the known planets. There is no timetable describing the wandering world returning every few thousand years. There is no instruction telling humanity to prepare for visitors. Instead, you enter a system where stars, planets, constellations, divine names, and positions in the sky can overlap through layers of meaning. Nibiru belongs within that complexity. One important appearance occurs in the Babylonian creation composition, commonly called Enuma Elish. There, the god Marduk establishes cosmic order after defeating the forces of primordial chaos. Stars receive positions, heavenly structures are arranged, time itself becomes organized through celestial order. Within this cosmic arrangement, Nibiru receives a significant role. The name can be associated with a crossing point or a position that regulates celestial movement. The description is grand. It is also religious. Marduk's authority becomes visible through the ordering of heaven. The sky reflects kingship on a cosmic scale. You can almost imagine the celestial dome as a vast court where every star has been assigned its proper place. Nothing important wanders without meaning. The ancient scholar reading such a text is not necessarily trying to locate an undiscovered planet. He is contemplating order. The heavens have structure. Marduk has authority. Celestial movement confirms that authority. That is a very different idea from a hidden world carrying extraterrestrial inhabitants. The modern transformation begins when ancient terms are pulled away from their literary surroundings. Nibiru becomes an object. The object becomes a planet. The planet receives an orbit. The orbit receives a schedule. The schedule receives passengers. Step by step, a new narrative appears. Each edition feels possible only because the original term remains unfamiliar to most readers. This is where uncertainty becomes powerful. If a word sounds mysterious, people can easily imagine that experts have overlooked something extraordinary. In reality, Assyriologists and historians have studied these texts for generations. Translations change when better copies are discovered, but the basic problem is not scholarly neglect. The problem is ancient complexity. One quirky detail illustrates that complexity beautifully. A single celestial object could possess several names depending upon its phase, location, divine association, or textual tradition. Modern astronomy prefers standardized labels. Ancient skywatchers were comfortable with overlapping identities. The heavens were not merely a map of objects. They were a map of relationships. A planet might be connected with a god. A constellation might represent a creature. A particular position could carry omen significance. A term like Nibiru could therefore perform several functions without becoming one mysterious body. This flexibility has created an open scholarly debate concerning the precise identification of Nibiru in every surviving passage. Specialists broadly agree that the evidence does not support the popular image of a hidden returning planet. They still discuss how particular references should be understood within different astronomical and theological contexts. That is the important distinction. Debate exists, but the debate is not usually between a secret planet and no secret planet. It concerns ancient terminology. Modern fringe literature often presents a much more dramatic picture. In that interpretation, Nibiru is an inhabited world moving on a vast orbit through the solar system. Its inhabitants are identified with the Anunnaki, who supposedly came to Earth in remote antiquity. Some versions claim that periodic approaches of this world caused enormous geological disasters. Others connect it with floods, sudden climate changes, or the collapse of ancient civilizations. The ancient texts do not provide this astronomical model. Modern astronomy also offers no confirmed evidence for a large inhabited planet periodically entering the inner solar system on such a path. A massive object following that orbit would influence the motions of known planets in measurable ways. The speculative Nibiru therefore belongs to modern alternative mythology rather than established Mesopotamian astronomy. Yet dismissing the modern claim does not make the ancient word uninteresting. Its original meaning may be stranger in a quieter way. A crossing point is not merely a location. It is a place where movement becomes significant. One path meets another. One region gives way to another. Boundaries become visible. Ancient cultures often attach powerful meaning to thresholds. City gates were thresholds. Temple doors were thresholds. River crossings were thresholds. The horizon itself was a threshold where celestial bodies appeared and disappeared. Nibiru participates in that language of passage. You watch Jupiter rise slowly. To an ancient observer, the planet is not simply a sphere composed largely of gas. It is a luminous traveller whose position can signal divine order. Its movement can be measured. Its appearance can be interpreted. Its return is expected because observation has revealed a cycle. No mysterious planet is required. The known sky is already filled with recurrence. That may explain part of Nibiru's modern appeal. Human imagination responds strongly to things that return. A comet returns. A season returns. A planet returns to a familiar region of the sky. A lost king returns in legend. A god returns in prophecy. Once a celestial name becomes linked with recurrence, modern storytelling can easily transform that cycle into an approaching event. The idea begins to feel inevitable. Something is coming back. You search the ancient record for a date. There is none. You search for a countdown. There is none. You search for instructions concerning the arrival of the Anunnaki. Again, nothing appears in the authenticated texts. What survives is more ambiguous. Celestial bodies move according to patterns. Divine authority is reflected in those patterns. The sky becomes a language of order. Nibiru occupies a place within that language whose exact meaning depends upon the composition being read. That uncertainty is real. The modern planet is an addition. You stand beneath the night sky while the scribe records another observation. He may recognize Jupiter. He may interpret an omen. He may understand Nibiru through a scholarly tradition unavailable to ordinary people around him. He is not waiting for a hidden world to emerge suddenly from darkness. He is watching the familiar heavens with extraordinary patience. A bright point moves. Another rises. The horizon receives them one by one. Perhaps the deepest mystery is not whether Nibiru is approaching. Perhaps it is how an ancient term for celestial order became, thousands of years later, a symbol of expectation. The clay preserves one world. Modern imagination builds another around it. Between those two worlds, the name continues crossing boundaries. And perhaps that is the most fitting fate Nibiru could have received. A different kind of light now falls across the clay. It comes from electric lamps, museum cases, publishing houses, television studios, and eventually glowing computer screens. Ancient tablets remain silent behind glass, while modern readers begin giving them entirely new voices. The change happens gradually. During the 19th and 20th centuries, scholars learned to read increasing numbers of Mesopotamian texts as excavations expanded across Iraq and neighbouring regions. Museums filled with tablets recovered from cities whose names had survived mainly through ancient tradition. A lost literary world became readable again. Specialists trained for years to understand grammar, damaged signs, scribal conventions, and the historical settings in which individual compositions were copied. The work was slow. Public imagination moved faster. By the 20th century, ancient Mesopotamia had become fertile territory for writers interested in forgotten technologies, lost civilizations, unusual astronomy, and visitors from other worlds. The Anunnaki entered that new landscape. Their transformation did not begin with one newly discovered tablet announcing an extraterrestrial origin. It developed through interpretation. Ancient divine names were combined with modern ideas about space travel, biological engineering, planetary science, and technological civilization. The result was a powerful new mythology wearing ancient clothing. One of the most influential figures in this transformation was Zecharia Sitchin. Beginning during the 1970s, he published books arguing that Mesopotamian texts preserved memories of advanced beings from another planet. In his interpretation, the Anunnaki were physical visitors rather than gods understood through religion. Their world was identified with Nibiru. Humanity became connected with deliberate biological intervention. Ancient labour traditions became evidence of an engineered workforce. The story was enormous. It offered origins. It offered purpose. It offered hidden history. It also offered something modern audiences often find irresistible. Someone knew the secret. Sitchin presented his readings as recoveries of information that conventional scholarship had supposedly misunderstood or ignored. That framing helped the theory spread far beyond specialist circles. You can imagine encountering the claim for the first time. A photograph shows a clay tablet. A translation appears beside it. Then a narrator explains that the strange gods were actually travellers using technology beyond ancient human understanding. The leap can feel smaller than it really is. A god descending becomes a visitor arriving. A divine weapon becomes advanced technology. A sacred assembly becomes a ruling council of non-human beings. A creation myth becomes biological engineering. Once the first transformation is accepted, the others begin supporting one another. The system becomes internally persuasive. This is how alternative historical narratives often become powerful. They do not rely upon one claim. They create networks. Every unusual object becomes evidence for another unusual object. Every difficult word supports another interpretation. Every missing fragment becomes a possible hiding place for lost information. The absence of evidence can even become part of the story. Perhaps the proof was destroyed. Perhaps museums refused to display it. Perhaps scholars misunderstood it. Perhaps governments already know. The theory becomes difficult to disprove. Almost any objection can be absorbed into the structure. Mainstream specialists approach the text very differently. Researchers trained at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Chicago work through languages, manuscript traditions, archaeological contexts, and comparative evidence. Their translations do not identify the Anunnaki as extraterrestrial miners. They do not find descriptions of genetic laboratories. They do not reconstruct Nibiru as an inhabited planet returning periodically toward Earth. The disagreement is not simply about imagination. It begins with language. Ancient words have histories. A sign can possess several meanings. A divine name may change function according to context. A damaged sentence cannot safely be completed according to what a modern reader hopes to find. Translation requires restraint. That restraint can feel disappointing. A missing line is mysterious. The responsible translation may simply admit that the line is missing. Modern storytelling prefers solution. Clay prefers patience. There is a quirky detail in the history of popular ancient astronaut theories. Images of Mesopotamian cylinder seals are frequently presented as though they depict the solar system from a distant technological viewpoint. One famous seal impression shows a star-shaped symbol surrounded by smaller circular forms. Alternative interpretations describe these circles as planets arranged around a central sun. Specialists generally understand such imagery within Mesopotamian religious and celestial symbolism, rather than as a scientific diagram of planetary orbits. The difference is revealing. Modern eyes see a diagram because modern culture is trained to recognize diagrams. Ancient eyes may have seen divine symbols. Context changes perception. You look at the same image twice. The first time, someone tells you it shows planets. You begin counting circles. The second time, a historian explains symbolic conventions used in Mesopotamian seals. The image changes without changing at all. Interpretation has altered ad what untis. This is one reason fringe histories can feel so convincing. They give the eye instructions. Look here. Count these. Ignore that. Connect this symbol with that story. Soon, unrelated fragments begin appearing coordinated. The mind is excellent. Interpret findings of patterns. Sometimes that ability produces discovery. Sometimes it produces constellations where only scattered stars exist. There remains an open scholarly debate about how modern societies should understand the popularity of ancient astronaut interpretations. Some historians of culture emphasize mistrust of institutions. Others point toward fascination with science fiction, archaeology, space exploration, and the possibility that human history contains forgotten chapters. Another view examines how modern technological language reshapes religious stories into narratives that feel scientifically respectable. The debate is not about whether Sumerian tablets describe modern genetic engineering. The evidence does not support that conclusion. The debate concerns why the interpretation became culturally persuasive. The timing matters. The 20th century transformed humanity's relationship with the sky. Aircraft crossed continents. Rockets left the atmosphere. Humans walked on the moon. Radio telescopes listened toward distant stars. Scientists began discussing seriously whether life might exist elsewhere in the universe. Ancient stories of descending gods suddenly acquired a new possible vocabulary. A chariot could become a spacecraft. Heaven could become the outer space. Divine knowledge could become advanced science. Immortality could become biotechnology. The gods became understandable through machines. That transformation says as much about modern civilization as it does about ancient Mesopotamia. Every age interprets the past through familiar tools. Medieval readers could imagine demons. Victorian readers could imagine lost races. The space age imagines astronauts. The digital age imagines simulations. Ancient clay becomes a mirror. You see what your own world has taught you to expect. This does not mean every unconventional question should be mocked. Archaeology advances because people ask questions. Established interpretations can change. New discoveries can overturn assumptions. Languages can be reread when stronger evidence appears. Scholarly caution is not a command to stop wondering. It is a method for separating possibility from evidence. That distinction becomes especially important when a claim is extraordinary. If an ancient text truly described visitors from another planet, the discovery would transform human history. Specialists would not need to hide it. They would spend careers arguing over it, publishing it, testing it, and becoming extremely famous in the process. Academics are human. A genuine extraterrestrial tablet would not suffer from lack of volunteers. Yet no authenticated Mesopotamian text has produced that evidence. What exists instead is a remarkable collision between two narratives. One belongs to ancient religion. The other belongs to modern technological imagination. The Anunnaki stand between them. You can feel how easily they move from one world into the other. A divine assembly becomes a crew. A sacred hierarchy becomes command structure. Human service becomes engineered labor. A celestial name becomes a home planet. The transformation is complete. And once that new story enters popular culture, it begins producing traditions of its own. Books repeat it. Films visualize it. Websites expand it. New interpretations build upon old interpretations until the modern mythology develops layers almost as complicated as the ancient one. You close the book and look again at the clay tablet beneath museum glass. Nothing on its surface has changed. The wedges remain exactly where a scribe pressed them thousands of years ago. Only the story surrounding them has grown. Silence has a peculiar weight when you expect a revelation. You sit beneath the soft light of a museum reading room, while photographs of damaged tablets lie across a broad wooden table. Some are complete enough to follow line by line. Others survive as corners, edges, or narrow strips of clay. You begin searching for particular things: machines, flying vessels, mines, laboratories, instructions for altering human bodies, descriptions of distant planets inhabited by physical beings. The search feels reasonable because modern stories have taught you to expect such evidence. Yet the words do not appear. Authenticated Mesopotamian texts contain extraordinary material, including divine councils, creation, floods, dreams, monsters, heavenly journeys, omens, and encounters between humans and gods. They do not clearly describe spacecraft. They do not clearly describe genetic engineering. They do not clearly describe extraterrestrial mining operations. That absence is one of the most important facts surrounding modern Anunnaki claims. Specialists trained at Yale, Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Chicago have translated enormous collections of Mesopotamian texts. Their work includes economic accounts, royal inscriptions, prayers, myths, astronomical records, medical texts, legal documents, and school exercises. None produces an accepted description of an advanced extraterrestrial industrial civilization. The silence is not complete because the tablets contain no wonders. They contain many. The difficulty comes from deciding what kind of wonder you're reading. Imagine a text describing a god surrounded by terrifying radiance. A modern reader may think of electrical energy. An ancient worshipper may have understood sacred brilliance. Another composition describes a divine journey through heaven. Modern imagination may supply engines. The ancient poet may be speaking through mythic movement. The words remain identical. The machinery enters Lysa. This distinction sounds simple until you confront damaged language. A single missing sign can change interpretation. A broken verb can leave movement uncertain. A noun may possess several meanings depending upon context. Fragments recovered without secure archaeological records can create additional difficulties. The responsible translator therefore works slowly. There is a strange dignity in saying "we do not know." That sentence rarely becomes a popular headline. Certainty is much easier to sell. You turn another photograph. The tablet records sheep. Another records barley. A third lists offerings. A fourth contains a legal dispute. Ancient Mesopotamia produced an enormous amount of writing about ordinary administration. This creates a quiet problem for extraordinary theories. If advanced visitors operated mines, laboratories, transportation systems, and large organized workforces, where are the mundane records supporting those operations? Mesopotamian scribes recorded astonishing details. They counted livestock. They measured grain. They tracked workers. They listed deliveries. They recorded loans, taxes, property, wages, and temple supplies. A civilization capable of documenting thousands of jars can become surprisingly inconvenient for a theory requiring invisible industrial infrastructure. One quirky archival detail makes the problem almost amusing. Some tablets preserve receipts so specific that you can follow quantities of onions, wool, fish, or beer through administrative systems. The ancient world left paperwork everywhere. Apparently bureaucracy survives even when palaces do not. If large quantities of gold had been extracted for non-human visitors, you might reasonably expect related accounting to appear somewhere among the surviving economic archives. Gold certainly existed in Mesopotamia. It appeared in elite objects, jewellery, temple wealth, and long-distance exchange. But the evidence does not reveal a vast mining economy designed to supply beings from another planet. Southern Mesopotamia itself lacks major gold deposits. Precious metals usually arrive through trade networks reaching distant regions. That fact fits known ancient economics. It does not require a secret planetary mission. Modern theories often respond by moving the alleged mining operations elsewhere, particularly into Africa. The story then expands geographically. Mesopotamian gods become supervisors of mines far beyond Mesopotamia. Humanity becomes a workforce created to extract valuable resources. Ancient creation traditions are read as technical reports. Yet archaeological evidence from early mining regions reveals human tools, human settlements, and gradual technological development. No clear, non-human industrial layer has been identified. The absence remains. Of course, absence of evidence is not always evidence of absence. Archaeologists know this better than most people. Entire archives can disappear. Mud brick dissolve. Wood decays. Metal is melted and reused. Cities are destroyed. Rivers shift. Modern construction damages ancient layers. Excavation itself samples only a small portion of what once existed. This creates an open, scholarly question far larger than the Anunnaki debate. How much of ancient life has vanished without leaving recoverable traces? The answer is undoubtedly enormous. Historians constantly reconstruct societies from incomplete evidence. But incompleteness has limits. Missing evidence cannot automatically support whichever theory requires it. Otherwise, every silence could prove everything. You feel the attraction of the empty space. A broken tablet almost invites completion. Your mind wants to restore the lost line. Suppose a text says that a god came down from heaven in his radiant, and the next section is missing. You might imagine a vessel. Someone else imagines a storm. Another reader imagines ceremonial light. Only one thing is certain. The clay is broken. The missing words belong to nobody now. That uncertainty can become strangely seductive. A complete text tells you what it says. A damaged text lets imagination enter. The less evidence survives, the more room speculation receives. This is one reason hidden history narratives often flourish around fragmentary civilizations. Mystery lives comfortably inside gaps. The same phenomenon appears with unusual archaeological hits. A carved symbol resembles a modern machine. A figurine resembles someone wearing a helmet. A relief contains shapes that look technical when viewed through modern expectations. You recognize something familiar. Then familiarity becomes interpretation. This process has a name in psychology, though you do not need specialized vocabulary to understand it. Humans are pattern seekers. You see faces in clouds. Animals appear in constellations. Shapes in stone become meaningful because your mind dislikes randomness. That ability helps you survive. It also creates very confident mistakes. The scholarly challenge is therefore not to destroy imagination. It is to discipline it. A strong interpretation should explain the language, archaeological context, comparable texts, material evidence, and historical setting at the same time. A theory becomes weaker when each missing piece requires another assumption. One hidden spacecraft requires hidden maintenance. Hidden maintenance requires hidden workshops. Hidden workshops require hidden workers. Hidden workers require hidden settlements. Soon, absence itself becomes the main evidence. You can feel the structure becoming circular. The theory is true because the proof was concealed. The proof was concealed because the theory is true. There is no easy way out of that room. The ancient tablets deserve something better. Their actual contents are already extraordinary. They preserve people trying to understand death. They preserve rulers seeking legitimacy. They preserve prayers whispered during illness. They preserve contracts between merchants. They preserve myths explaining why humans work, suffer, love, build, and die. They preserve sky watchers measuring celestial cycles with astonishing patience. None of this requires technological visitors to become interesting. Perhaps the real discomfort comes from wanting the tablets to say more than they do. You want the clay to answer enormous questions. Were we created deliberately? Are we alone? Did another civilization shape us? Will powerful beings return? The tablets speak around these questions without answering them in modern terms. That can feel frustrating. Yet silence is part of historical evidence. Not every gap contains a secret. Not every missing line hides a machine. Sometimes the clay simply ends. You close the final photograph. The room becomes quiet again. No spacecraft emerges. No laboratory appears. No hidden mining map unfolds across the rubble. What remains is something subtler. Human beings have stared into incomplete evidence and filled the darkness with possibility. Perhaps the mystery is not only what the tablets conceal. Perhaps it is why you feel such a powerful need for them to conceal something at all. A cool draft moves through the ruined doorway. You stand where a sanctuary once held lamps, offerings, priests, sacredest images, and generations of carefully repeated ceremony. The roof is gone now. Grass grows between broken foundations, and the evening sky spreads openly above walls that once enclosed holy darkness. Nothing appears to remain. Yet ancient Mesopotamian religion makes absence more complicated than empty architecture suggests. A god could lose a temple without losing existence. A city could fall without destroying the divine power associated with it. A sacred image could be removed, hidden, captured, or broken while the deity continued beyond that physical form. Presence did not always require visibility. This creates a quieter interpretation of the Anunnaki question. Perhaps departure is the wrong category. Not because powerful beings secretly occupy underground chambers, and not because ancient visitors concealed themselves somewhere beyond modern observation. The possibility is more subtle. Within Mesopotamian thought, divine beings belong to structures that continue whether humans see them or not. They belong to heaven. They belong to earth. They belong to hidden waters. They belong to death. They belong to cities, authority, judgment, fertility, storms, and the ordering of human society. A power woven into such a system does not need to travel away. It can simply become inaccessible. You walk across the ruined sanctuary. Your sandals disturb fine dust. A small piece of baked brick lies near your foot, stamped long ago with the name of a ruler whose kingdom vanished centuries before another empire even began. The king is gone. His language eventually disappeared from daily speech. The institution he supported collapsed. Yet the river system that shaped his world still exists. The night sky still turns. People still die. Cities still depend upon organization. Human societies still struggle over authority, food, land, labor, justice, and memory. The old divine names disappear while the realities attached to them remain. That distinction can feel unsettling. It suggests that religious disappearance may not equal conceptual disappearance. A storm god can vanish from worship while storms continue. A goddess of fertility can lose her temples while birth and harvest remain. A judge of the dead can be forgotten while mortality continues gathering every generation. The sacred language changes. The underlying human experience does not. Researchers at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, and the University of Chicago have long examined how ancient religious systems adapt when political power changes. Gods can rise in importance when their cities become dominant and decline when those cities lose influence. Divine hierarchies can therefore reflect earthly history. A local god becomes imperial. An imperial god becomes marginal. Another deity absorbs older functions. Names shift while sacred roles survive. This pattern does not require supernatural beings physically moving between locations. It shows religion responding to changing societies. Yet from inside the ancient worldview, the explanation could feel very different. The god remains. Human access changes. That idea appears powerfully during the periods of conquest. When a city suffers defeat, its people may interpret catastrophe as divine abandonment. The deity has turned away. The protective presence has been withdrawn. The language does not necessarily mean the god has ceased to exist. It means the relationship has failed. There is a strange emotional logic here. You can be abandoned by someone who still exists. Absence therefore proves distance, not extinction. Modern discussions of returning gods often assume a physical journey. Something arrived. Something departed. Something must travel back. Mesopotamian sacred geography does not always work through that sequence. A deity might manifest in one place while belonging to a much larger cosmic domain. The temple gives presence a focus. The statue gives presence a body. Ritual gives presence a rhythm. None necessarily defines the complete extent of the god. This is one reason ancient religion can feel slippery when translated into modern categories. You may ask whether a god is physically inside the Sintju. The ancient answer may resist a simple yes or no. You may ask whether a deity lives in heaven or inside a city temple. The tradition may allow both. You may ask whether underworld judges are beneath the soil in a measurable location. The mythology may treat the direction as meaningful without offering geography that a surveyor could map. Modern thought often demands one address. Ancient sacred thought can tolerate withdrawal. A quirky example appears in the way divine statues sometimes travel during festivals. A deity could leave the temple through its cult image, move through streets, visit another sanctuary, or participate in ceremonial journeys. Crowds might witness the procession. Music could accompany it. Priests managed every stage. The god had moved, yet the divine identity was not reduced to the wooden or metal object being carried. Sacred presence was mobile without becoming ordinary transportation. Nobody needed wheels in heaven simply because a statue used a cart on earth. That distinction becomes important when fringe theories reinterpret ceremonial movement as remembered technology. A divine procession becomes evidence of a vehicle. A sacred boat becomes a machine. A temple journey becomes a record of physical travel by non-human rulers. Such readings are possible only by removing the ritual setting. The surviving evidence fits a religious ceremony far more securely. Still, however, the ceremonies reveal something fascinating. Presence can move. Presence can concentrate. Presence can withdraw. Presence can return. These are religious categories, but they create a pattern very different from permanent departure. You pause near what may once have been an inner chamber. The stones are cool beneath your hand. No priest remains to tell you whether the god is present. No offering smoke rises. No hymn fills the room. Modern archaeology sees abandonment. Ancient theology might have asked another question. Has the deity left, or have humans stopped maintaining the relationship? That difference changes everything. An open scholarly debate surrounds how ordinary Mesopotamians personally understood divine presence outside official temple theology. Most surviving texts were produced by trained scribes, temples, palaces, and educated elites. The voices of farmers, servants, children, and labourers survive less clearly. Did they imagine gods exactly as priests describe them? Probably not in every case. Religion is rarely uniform across an entire population. Household practices reveal smaller protective deities, ancestral concerns, charms, personal prayers, and fears that official literature cannot fully capture. Divine presence may therefore have been experienced at several levels. The great gods belong to cosmic order. Family gods belong near domestic life. Spirits could inhabit dangerous boundaries. The dead remained connected with households. Sacred reality surrounded a person from many directions. There was little need for the divine to make a spectacular return. It had never become completely remote. You begin to understand why modern expectations can distort the ancient picture. A modern story often imagines emptiness between appearances. The visitors arrive, interact, depart, and disappear into space. Thousands of years pass. Then everyone waits for their return. Mesopotamian religion presents something denser. The unseen world remains close even when nothing dramatic occurs. A dream may carry a message. An omen may reveal danger. A temple ritual may restore favour. A royal victory may display divine approval. A sickness may inspire prayer. A death may require offerings. The sacred does not wait for one grand arrival. It enters ordinary life repeatedly. This does not prove that the Anunnaki exist as physical beings today. There is no archaeological evidence establishing hidden survivors from an ancient non-human civilization. The stronger observation is historical. Ancient Mesopotamians did not always imagine divine powers as temporary guests occupying Earth for a limited mission. They imagined them as participants in the permanent order of existence. That is a fundamentally different idea. Perhaps that the modern phrase "they never left" becomes meaningful only when stripped of spacecraft. Perhaps what remains is not a population. Perhaps it is a structure. Authority still seeks sacred justification. Humans still organize themselves into hierarchies. Knowledge remains unequal. Death remains unavoidable. The heavens still inspire interpretation. Hidden depths still provoke imagination. The old names may have vanished from everyday worship, but the questions attached to them remain almost embarrassingly alive. Who governs? Who decides? Why do humans labour? Why does knowledge have limits? Why does death separate us from whatever lies beyond? You listen to the wind moving through the ruined doorway. There is no answer. Only the ancient architecture remains, open now to the sky. The absence is real. But absence, in the world these people imagined, was never quite the same thing as departure. Expectation herself. It is the quiet sound of people looking toward a horizon and believing something absent may appear again. Sometimes they wait for a king. Sometimes they wait for a teacher. Sometimes they wait for a god who once walked among humans and promised nothing clearly enough to be verified. Yet the expectation survives. You find versions of this pattern across many cultures, separated by oceans, languages, climates, and centuries. A powerful figure belongs to an earlier age. That figure disappears. The present feels diminished. Then memory begins suggesting that the loss may not be permanent. Return becomes possible. The idea is psychologically powerful because it transforms absence into suspense. Someone who is simply dead belongs to the past. Someone who may return belongs partly to the future. That distinction changes how memory behaves. Ancient societies often imagined time differently than from the straight line preferred by modern calendars. Seasons repeat, stars return, rivers rise and fall, harvests disappear into bare fields before growing again. Nature teaches recurrence constantly. Religious imagination notices. In Mesopotamia, the god Dumuzi became connected with cycles of death, lamentation, fertility, and seasonal change. Traditions surrounding him developed over long periods, and surviving compositions describe movement between worlds through complex sacred narratives. The details do not create a simple promise that Dumuzi will physically arrive again in a city. The deeper pattern concerns repetition. Loss is followed by restoration. Absence becomes temporary. The agricultural world makes that pattern visible. Grain disappears into soil. Vegetation withers. Heat destroys green fields. Then growth returns. To someone living close to seasonal rhythms, resurrection imagery requires very little imagination. The land demonstrates it every year. Researchers at Oxford, Yale, and the University of Chicago have examined how ancient religious festivals connected cosmic stories with agricultural cycles, royal authority, and communal memory. Ritual did not merely describe the past, it could make sacred events feel present again. A festival repeated the pattern. Songs were sung again. Offerings were made again. Divine stories return through performance. You stand among a procession at dusk. Drums sound somewhere beyond the houses. People carry lamps. A priest recites words already old when his grandparents learned them. For the participants, sacred time can fold. An event that happened in myth becomes active through ritual. The god does not need to arrive from a distant place. The community enters the story again. This gives return a different meaning. Return can be physical. Return can also be ceremonial. A name spoken after centuries of repetition keeps a figure present in collective memory. A story retold prevents disappearance. Human beings are unusually skilled at refusing to let important figures remain completely gone. Consider the Egyptian god Osiris. His mythology centers upon death, restoration, kingship, and existence beyond ordinary mortal life. Osiris does not simply return to resume life as an earthly ruler. He becomes ruler within the realm of the dead. The transformation is more complicated than resurrection followed by ordinary continuation. Still, his story makes death permeable. Something can be destroyed and yet remain powerful. The human body fails. Sacred identity continues elsewhere. Greek traditions surrounding Persephone use seasonal movement between worlds to explain recurring absence and presence. Again, the pattern is not identical. Cultures do not share one secret master stories. They create different answers to similar human experiences. Winter comes. People die. Kings vanish. Cities collapse. Generations inherit memories of worlds they never personally saw. The question follows naturally. Could what disappeared somehow return? This question becomes especially strong when people believe the distant past was better than the present. A lost age gains qualities everyday life lacks. Its rulers become wiser. Its buildings become greater. Its teachers possess knowledge no longer available. Its gods communicate more openly. Memory polishes antiquity until the past begins shine. You rarely hear legends complaining that the Golden Age had terrible drainage and inconvenient tax collectors. Human nostalgia has standards. The lost world becomes valuable because it is lost. Once idealized, its return becomes desirable. This pattern reaches far beyond religion. Legends tell of kings who do not truly die. They sleep. They wait beneath mountains. They rest inside hidden chambers. When their people face the greatest danger, they will awaken. Medieval traditions eventually applied this pattern to figures such as King Arthur and Emperor Frederick. The cultural settings differ greatly from Mesopotamia, yet the emotional structure feels familiar. The ruler is not gone forever. History is merely waiting. An unusual fringe habit continues this pattern today. Some modern enthusiasts examine earthquakes, unusual lights, planetary alignments, and repeating numbers as supposed signs that ancient teachers are preparing to reveal themselves again. One event means little. Several events placed together begin looking like a message. The interpretation depends more upon pattern-seeking than ancient evidence. Yet emotionally, it performs the same function as older expectations. The present becomes temporary. Something larger approaches. You begin watching ordinary events differently. A bright planet is no longer just a planet. A strange cloud is no longer just weather. An archaeological discovery becomes a signal. The world seems full of preparation. That feeling can become addictive. Dictivum, waiting uncertainty direction. Instead of asking what will happen, you begin believing something specific is coming. This helps explain why stories about the Anunnaki often develop return narratives, even though authenticated Mesopotamian texts provide no clear prediction of such an event. Modern expectation fills a space the ancient literature leaves open. The logic feels natural. If powerful beings once interacted with humanity, perhaps they might do so again. If knowledge once arrived from them, perhaps more knowledge could return. If civilization once depended upon their presence, perhaps modern disorder signals their absence. The theory becomes emotionally satisfying because it turns history into unfinished business. But historians must separate emotional logic from textual evidence. There is no securely translated Sumerian prophecy announcing a future physical return of the Anunnaki. There is no ancient calendar counting down to their arrival. There is no reliable tablet describing modern humanity waiting for them. The expectation comes largely from modern reinterpretation. That does not make the expectation meaningless. It makes it human. Scholars continue debating why return traditions appear so frequently across cultures. Some explanations emphasize seasonal cycles. Others focus on political trauma, especially communities remembering displaced rulers or lost independence. Psychologists examine hope, grief, and the difficulty of accepting permanent absence. Historians of religion study how rituals repeatedly make sacred figures present with event, requiring literal physical return. No single explanation covers every tradition. The pattern emerges from several human needs. You want loss to have an ending. You want injustice to remain temporary. You want wisdom that vanished to become available again. You want the broken world repaired by someone who remembers how it was supposed to work. That desire can create returning Yotsu. It can create sleeping kings. It can create vanished teachers who supposedly left instructions hidden beneath temples. can create civilizations waiting below oceans, mountains, deserts, or polar ice. The location changes. The expectation remains. Perhaps that this is why ancient gods become especially vulnerable to return stories. Their disappearance is incomplete. They leave names. They leave temples. They leave inscriptions. They leave stories describing powers greater than human beings possess. Modern people encounter those remains and feel the absence surrounding them. Ruins make vanished presence visible. An empty throne invites someone to imagine the ruler coming back. A silent temple invites someone to imagine footsteps returning through its doorway. You stand beneath a night sky where familiar stars slowly rise. Nothing extraordinary happens. That may be precisely why expectation becomes so powerful. Waiting transforms stillness into possibilities. Every horizon becomes an entrance. Every rediscovered tablet becomes a potential message. Every gap in history becomes a place where someone might have gone. Yet perhaps the figure being awaited matters less than the waiting itself. The returning God carries human hope. The vanished teacher carries human longing for lost knowledge. The sleeping king carries the wish that history can still be corrected. And the Anunnaki, transformed by a modern imagination, carry all three desires at once. You look toward the horizon. It remains empty. Still, people continue watching. Dust settles inside a storage room where thousands of fragments wait in shallow trays. Some carry royal names. Some preserve hymns. Others contain only a handful of signs, barely enough to identify the kind of text they once belonged to. You look across them and sense something larger than any single story. Civilizations do not preserve memory cleanly. They compress it. They reshape it. They attach old fears to new rulers, old gods to new cities, and ancient disasters to generations that never witnessed them. Memory survives by changing. That may be one of the deepest truths hidden inside the Anunnaki tradition. Perhaps the question is not simply whether these beings were gods or visitors. Perhaps the harder question is what kind of memory could create such beings in the first place. Human communities remember important events differently from archives. A tablet can preserve a transaction precisely. A family story changes every time it's told. A ritual can preserve gestures whose original explanation has been forgotten. A sacred name can outlive the language that first gave it meaning. Over centuries, these layers begin overlapping. History becomes myth without necessarily becoming meaningless. Researchers at Yale, Oxford, and the University of Pennsylvania have shown how Mesopotamian traditions were copied, adapted, and reinterpreted across long periods of political change. Sumerian compositions continued to be studied even after Sumerian ceased to function as an ordinary spoken language. That fact is remarkable. A civilization can keep speaking through schools long after its everyday voice has fallen silent. Scribes learned old vocabulary. They copied ancient hymns. They preserved royal traditions. They maintained stews that already belonged to a distant past. You imagine a student copying a sacred composition whose first audience lived centuries earlier. The student understands the words. Yet does he understand them exactly as the earliest listeners did? Probably not. Language survives. Nature survives more easily than context. This happens constantly in human culture. A phrase remains familiar while its original meaning fades. A ceremony continues because ancestors performed it. A story remains important because everyone agrees that it is important. Eventually, repetition itself becomes authority. The Anunnaki may have accumulated meaning through this process. One generation encounters them as members of a divine assembly. Another associates them more strongly with judgment. A later tradition places them within different cosmic arrangements. Modern readers encounter the surviving fragments and create still another interpretation. The name travels farther than the original theology. That journey is almost more fascinating than a simple disappearance. You begin considering several possibilities. Perhaps the Anunnaki preserve nothing more mysterious than the religious imagination of ancient Mesopotamia. This remains the mainstream historical explanation. They are divine beings whose roles developed within changing traditions of temple worship, kingship, cosmic order, and sacred literature. That interpretation fits the linguistic and archaeological evidence securely. Yet religion itself can preserve older human experiences. A storm god may embody generations of fear surrounding destructive weather. A fertility goddess may gather memories of agriculture, birth, sexuality, and seasonal uncertainty. A divine council may echo political institutions familiar to people living under kings and assemblies. Myth does not need to describe literal events in order to preserve historical experience. The Anunnaki may therefore hold memories of authority, not particular rulers, authority itself. A powerful group gathers somewhere beyond ordinary access. They determine outcomes. They define order. Human beings live beneath their decision. That structure resembles many forms of government. It also resembles the human experience of confronting forces nobody controls. Drought decides whether children eat us. Disease decides who survives. War decides whether a city remains standing. From below, such forces feel almost personal. Someone must be deciding. Someone must know. Someone must be responsible. Divine assemblies give uncertainty a face. Another possibility lies in ancestral memory. Human societies often preserve traces of migrations, floods, conflicts, and political collapse inside stories whose details become increasingly symbolic. Modern researchers studying oral traditions have documented cases where memories of environmental events survive surprisingly long, although assigning exact dates to such traditions remains difficult. Could parts of Mesopotamian mythology contain faint memories of social worlds older than writing? It is possible. Writing appears relatively late in humanity's story. People lived, migrated, fought, worshipped, and survived disasters for thousands of years before scribes pressed signs into clay. Most of those experiences disappeared without direct records. The silence is enormous. Myth may contain echoes, but an echo is not a photograph. This distinction protects you from treating every strange story as literal history. Scholars continue discussing how far cultural memory can preserve information accurately across very long periods. The question remains difficult because stories change while they survive. A flood may preserve memory of real floods without recording one exact event. A divine king may preserve memory of early rulers without preserving his actual lifespan. A sacred journey may reflect migration without describing a geographical route. Memory can be truthful without being precise. That idea creates a middle ground, often ignored by arguments demanding either absolute fact or complete invention. A myth can preserve emotional truth. It can preserve social structure. It can preserve fragments of environmental experience. It can preserve political ideology. It can also invent freely. Several layers may coexist. There is a quirky example hidden inside ancient scribal culture. Some scholars created lists explaining rare words, divine names, plants, stones, animals, and unusual signs from texts already difficult for their own generation. Ancient Mesopotamians sometimes needed help understanding ancient Mesopotamia. You can almost picture the exhausted student staring at an old word while a teacher explains that nobody uses it anymore. The past was mysterious even then. That detail matters because modern readers are not the first people trying to reconstruct forgotten meanings. Ancient scribes inherited fragments too. They interpreted traditions whose beginnings were already distant. Their explanations may preserve learning. they may also preserve reinterpretation. The chain continues until the original moment becomes unreachable. Fringe theories add another possibility. Perhaps myths preserve encounters with an unknown advanced culture, later remembered as gods. This idea appears in many alternative histories, not only those involving the Anunnaki. A technologically superior population encounters another society. Its tools seem miraculous. Its knowledge becomes sacred. Its leaders become divine in memory. The scenario is imaginable in general. History contains examples of communities misunderstanding unfamiliar technology. But possibility is not evidence. For the Anunnaki, archaeology has not revealed a technologically advanced non-human civilization operating in prehistoric Mesopotamia. No confirmed material layer requires such an explanation. The theory remains speculative. Still, its popularity reveals something meaningful. Many people sense that civilization feels inherited. You are born into systems too complicated for one person to understand. Writing already exists. Agriculture already exists. Mathematics already exists. Government already exists. The stars already have names. It can feel as though someone must have handed everything down. Ancient people felt something similar. Their myths placed divine intelligence near the beginning. Modern people replace divine intelligence with technological intelligence. The structure barely changes. Only the vocabulary changes. Perhaps this is why the Anunnaki survive so easily between religious and technological interpretations. They occupy a flexible position. They can be gods to one reader, ancient rulers to another, extraterrestrials to another, symbols of authority to another, memories of forgotten social systems to another. The clay does not force all these meanings equally. Some are supported much more strongly than others. Yet the name continues attracting them. You hold an imagined fragment beneath the light. Only part of a divine total remains. The broken edge cuts through the sentence. You cannot restore everything. Be so sure. Perhaps no one ever will. There is something fitting about that incompleteness. Human history is not a sealed archive waiting for one final translation. It is a landscape of surviving pieces. Some fit together. Some mislead. Some remain alone. The Anunnaki stand within that broken landscape as both ancient gods and modern mirrors. They show what Mesopotamians believed about divine power. They also show what modern people hope ancient civilization might reveal. Perhaps beneath the stories lies no hidden species. Perhaps there is no lost planetary colony. Perhaps there is only something more familiar and more difficult to escape. Human beings inherit worlds they did not build. They search for whoever came first. They give names to invisible authority. They imagine teachers behind ancient knowledge. They wonder whether lost wisdom can return. And when the evidence becomes incomplete, imagination quietly enters the room. The tablets remain on the table. Their silence is not empty. It's filled with everything humanity still does not know about its own beginning. The last light fades across a plain of broken brick. You stand among walls reduced to low foundations, where wind moves softly through grass and loose dust. A few birds cross the darkening sky, then disappear beyond the horizon. Nothing announces itself. No thunder arrives. No hidden door opens. There is only the landscape, carrying the weight of cities whose names once meant everything to the people living inside them. Somewhere beneath the soil, clay tablets remain buried. Others rest in museums, universities, storerooms, and research collections across the world. Their surfaces carry prayers, calculations, contracts, royal claims, myths, astronomical observations, and divine names pressed into wet clay by human hands. Among those names are the Anunnaki. They survived because clay survived. That simple fact may be more remarkable than any modern theory attached to them. Empires vanished. Languages changed. Temples collapsed. Priesthoods disappeared. Yet a name remained intact enough to cross thousands of years and enter your imagination. You look upward. The stars appear slowly. Ancient observers once watched many of these same lights from rooftops and temple terraces. They gave them names, followed their movements, recorded their cycles, and connected them with powers they believed shaped the human world. The sky has changed less than the cities beneath it. That contrast can make history feel strangely temporary. People build walls. The stars continue. Kings issue decrees. The stars continue. Religions rise, transform, divide, and disappear. The stars continue. Perhaps this is why human beings so often place eternal beings above them. The sky gives permanence a visible form. Yet the Anunnaki were never confined to the heavens within Mesopotamian tradition. Their identities belong to a sacred order extending through divine councils, judgment, destiny, kingship, and hidden regions beyond ordinary human access. That makes the question of their disappearance difficult. To disappear physically, something must first exist physically in a recoverable sense. The historical evidence establishes belief. It establishes texts. It establishes the temples, rituals, offerings, the divine images, the astronomical traditions, and political systems shaped by the religious ideas. It does not establish a hidden population of extraterrestrial beings. That boundary should remain clear. Still, the thing undeniably survived. The system of question survived. Who gave civilization its order? Why does humanity labor Why is knowledge unequal? Why does power belong to some and not others? Why does death remain unavoidable? Why does the world sometimes appear organized by forces nobody can see? These questions are older than any modern theory about visitors from space. They are also more difficult to silence. Researchers at institutions such as Yale, Oxford, the University of Pennsylvania, and the University of Chicago continue studying Mesopotamian civilization through archaeology, language, environmental history, political institutions, and religious literature. Their work has revealed a human society far richer than the simple image of mysterious gods descending from somewhere beyond Earth. Cities developed through generations. Writing evolved. Administration became increasingly complex. Religious traditions changed with politics. Astronomical knowledge accumulated through patient observation. The evidence describes human history. That may sound less dramatic than a forgotten extraterrestrial intervention. Yet human history is strange enough. Imagine inventing writing without knowing where writing will lead. Imagine creating a system of marks designed to count grain, then watching those marks preserve poetry for 4,000 years. Imagine carving the name of a king because everyone around you believes his power will endure forever. Then imagine that his palace disappears while the tablet listing someone's beer ration survives. History has a peculiar sense of humour. One quirky truth about archaeological survival is that the objects considered most glorious are not always the ones that endure best. Gold attracts thieves. Wood burns. Textiles decay. Monuments are dismantled. Clay receipts remain stubbornly unimpressive and remarkably durable. Humanity often reaches antiquity through things nobody intended as idols. That should make you cautious whenever someone claims the past left one perfect secret message. The past usually arrives damaged. You reconstruct it through fragments. A foundation, a seal, a broken bowl, a burial, a tablet missing several lines, a scribal copy made centuries later. History resembles listening to a conversation through walls while half the speakers have vanished. Certainty becomes expensive. An open scholarly debate continues over how ancient myths preserve historical memory. Some traditions may contain echoes of environmental disasters, migrations, social conflicts, political institutions, and older religious practices. Other elements may be literary invention shaped by theology and ritual. Separating those layers remains difficult. A myth can preserve reality without functioning as a report. That possibility becomes especially important with divine beings. Perhaps ancient gods preserve memories of rulers. Perhaps they personify natural forces. Perhaps they embody political structures. Perhaps they represent psychological experiences transformed through religion. Perhaps several explanations overlap. None requires a hidden technological civilization. Yet none completely exhausts what myth means to the people who inherit it. A god can become more than the event that inspired the god. A story can outgrow its origin. A name can survive the disappearance of every person who once pronounced it natural. The Anunnaki demonstrate that process with unusual power. Their ancient identities entered modern culture and changed again. For some people, they remain figures from Mesopotamian religion. For others, they have become extraterrestrial ancestors, hidden rulers, genetic engineers, or travellers expected to return. The modern transformation has little support in authenticated ancient texts, but its emotional appeal is understandable. It offers a human beginning with intention. Someone designed us. Someone taught us. Someone knows what civilization is supposed to become. Perhaps someone may come back and explain this, or I can explain everything. That promise can be comforting. It can also prevent you from appreciating the uncertainty preserved in the clay. The tablets do not explain everything. They were never written for you. Their scribes had their own fears, duties, gods, arguments, and practical problems. You are listening across an enormous distance. Their world cannot be made completely familiar. That distance should remain. You walk through the imagined ruins as darkness deepens. A cold breeze touches the broken walls. The city feels empty, yet the emptiness contains traces of countless lives. Someone once carried bread through this street. Someone argued over property. Someone watched a child become sick. Someone prayed. Someone copied a divine name. Someone looked at the stars and wondered what they meant. Those people are gone. Their questions are not. Perhaps that is the quietest form of survival. Modern civilization continues creating councils, hierarchies, sacred symbols, myths of origin, systems of labour, and stories about hidden powers. The vocabulary changes. The pattern remains recognizable. You may no longer call these forces gods. You may call them institutions, systems, nature, history, probability, economics, genetics, or chance. Still, you live inside structures larger than yourself. You depend upon knowledge inherited from people you never met. You obey rules created long ago. You inhabit cities built upon forgotten decisions. You look toward the sky when earthly answers feel insufficient. The distance between ancient and modern life becomes smaller. Perhaps humanity has not been waiting for the return of particular beings. Perhaps humanity has been waiting for an explanation. That possibility feels less spectacular. It may also be more profound. You stand quietly beneath the ancient ski. Nothing descends. Nothing needs to. The tablets remain. The questions remain. And perhaps the story is not yet complete. The night becomes softer now. The ruined walls lose their sharp edges beneath the darkness, and the landscape slowly becomes one broad field of shadow. You no longer need to search every horizon. There is nowhere you must go. The old cities can rest beneath the soil without demanding an answer from you tonight. Let the questions become lighter. Perhaps the Anunnaki were only gods shaped by human imagination. Perhaps those gods preserved memories of authority, fear, nature, and ancient social order. Perhaps something unexpected remains hidden within evidence not yet discovered. History allows uncertainty. It does not require you to resolve it. You can simply listen. The wind passes over the plain. Dust settles against forgotten bricks. Far away, water continues moving through channels shaped by landscapes older than any surviving kingdom. Above everything, stars follow paths that ancient observers once recorded by lamplight. You breathe more slowly. The names of vanished cities drift away. Uruk, Eridu, Nippur. Their streets no longer need to be crowded. Their temples no longer need to be filled with smoke. Their kings no longer need to speak. The clay has spoken enough. You can leave the tablets resting where they are. Their broken lines remain broken. Their mysteries remain unfinished. There is comfort in that incompleteness. Not every door must open. Not every silence conceals a visitor. Not every ancient story needs to become modern fact. Sometimes mystery is simply the shape left behind when time removes more than it preserves. The night grows deeper. You imagine the final lamp being extinguished inside a distant temple. The flame narrows. The room cools. Outside, the sky remains immense. Perhaps nothing is returning. Perhaps nothing ever departed in the way modern stories imagine. Perhaps what survived was more elusive than a body, a vessel, or a hidden world. A pattern, a memory, a question passed carefully from one human mind to another. And perhaps, somewhere beneath all that quiet clay, the oldest part of the story is still sleeping. Good night.